session tonight. I will give us another minute so we can officially get to 5:30.
And Mr. Chair, just for the record, I do see that we have representatives from of both applicants. So we have both applicants that managed to at least get into this part of the meeting.
All right, it is 5:30 on August 15th. Let me call to order our meeting of the evening. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call to order the August 15th, 2022 meeting of the Hood River Planning Commission. My name is Mark Frost and I am the Planning Commission Chair. Let me start with a description of tonight's process and a few disclosures required by state law. First, it is our function in these land use cases to review the record for each application, take public testimony, and then determine whether the application meets or does not meet the applicable approval criteria in the Hood River Development Code. It is not our job to be more restrictive or lenient than these approval codes allow, but rather to interpret and apply the approval standards as written. If you have any questions about what applicable approval criteria are, they are listed and analyzed in the applicant's materials and staff report. They will also be summarized as part of tonight's presentation for each item. Second, we are required to render an impartial decision on each application. This means we cannot have a personal financial stake or bias that would prevent us from making an impartial decision. Before we begin each item, I will call for disclosure of bias, ex parte contact, or conflicts of interest from each commissioner. Anyone in the audience will then have the opportunity to question any of us about those disclosures. Our decision on the land uses will be final unless appealed to the City Council. To appeal our decision, you must participate either orally or in writing before the record closes on the item you are interested in. You must raise before us any issue you might wish to preserve for subsequent appeal to City Council or LUBA, the Land Use Board of Appeals. You must also present to us any evidence you might wish the City Council or LUBA to see. Once we close the record on an item, that will end your ability to raise new issues or present evidence. So let me describe the order of events for the hearings tonight. First, we will hear from the applicant. We want to understand more about the project and hear from the applicant any objections to the analysis and the proposed conditions in the staff report. Also, we ask that if there is opponent testimony, the applicant should keep careful notes and in your rebuttal, respond to that opponent testimony. Frequently in public testimony on land use applications pertains to how the development will function or what impacts it will have. The applicant is often in the best position to answer those questions. Next, we'll hear the staff report, which is a verbal rendition of the written report that was issued prior to tonight's hearing. Then anyone in favor of the proposal may testify. Then we may take neutral testimony, neither for nor against. And after that, we will accept testimony from anyone who is opposed to the proposal. Finally, the applicant has the right of final rebuttal. The applicant has the last word because applicant has the burden of proof, proving compliance with the mandatory approval criteria. After that, we will check to see if the staff has any parting comments following the conclusion of all public testimony. After everyone interested in these matters has had a chance to testify, we will close the record, deliberate, and we may render a decision tonight. However, our decision is not final until it is reduced to writing and officially issued. Except for the zone change request, our decisions are final unless appealed to City Council. To appeal to one of our decisions, you need to participate orally or writing before the close of the record, and you must raise before us any issue you want to preserve for such an appeal. If you need additional time to prepare your testimony, you can ask for a continuance or that the record be kept open. If you want either of these options, you must make that request during the public testimony portion of the item you are interested in before we close the record on that item. So here are some basic rules for presenting testimony in tonight's hearing. So first, only present testimony in the order I just recited, and do so at the podium in front of our virtual council table. Please begin with your name and mailing address. Also, limit your testimony to the applicable approval criteria identified in the staff report. Our decisions are governed quite strictly by those approval criteria, so you should tailor your testimony to those criteria. They are the only issues we can take into consideration. If you believe that there are other or different criteria apply, please identify those and explain why you think they apply. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence with sufficient specificity to allow us or the parties to respond to that issue will preclude an appeal to City Council or LUBA based on that issue. Failure by the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow us to respond to the issue will preclude an action for damages in circuit court. Finally, to ensure everyone has the opportunity to be heard, we are going to set time limits on the public testimony, although there is no limitation on the written argument that may be submitted. So that is by way of the procedural introduction for tonight's hearing. If anyone has any questions about the process moving forward, feel free to ask them during the public testimony meeting. And for those on the phone, let me remind you that the Zoom raise hand feature is *9 on your phone, or if you're using the Zoom app, just use the icon in the bottom. So with that, let's move right in. So tonight we will now consider the first item on tonight's agenda. That is file number 2022-27, an application by SFE Space Children's Advocacy Center requesting an approval conditional use requested for a public facility in a light industrial zone. Quorum of the Planning Commission is present, and I will now ask all commissioners to disclose any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, and bias in this matter. So let me just run down the list, if I may. So, Commissioner Mitchell.
I have none.
Commissioner Irving.
I have none.
Commissioner Stefina.
I have nothing to disclose.
Commissioner Hoffman.
I also have nothing.
Commissioner Petzing.
I have none.
Who have I missed? Commissioner Powers?
Yeah, I have none.
Okay, and Chair Frost has none. Okay, so thanks for that. Does anyone in the audience or commission member question any of the commissioners about bias, sorry, and on any disclosure, ex parte contact, bias, or conflict of interest, or otherwise challenge the participation of any member of the commission? All right, seeing none, I shall move forward. So tonight we're going to start with the applicant's presentation. Let's go ahead and promote the applicant.
Thank you. We have Beatrice Lynch as well as Jeff Dellis representing our first applicant under 2022-27 Safe Space conditional use approval. So if we could get them elevated to presentation.
Hi, sorry, I missed it. It glitched on me. This is Beatrice Lynch. Am I going first or?
You are going first, yes.
Okay, all right.
Are we ready? I think we're ready.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Beatrice. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you all for having us come in and talk to you all about Safe Space. Safe Space Children's Advocacy Center is the Gorge's only child abuse assessment center in the Gorge. We serve 5 counties throughout the Gorge: Hood River, Wasco, Gillum, Wheeler, and Klickitat counties. We get referrals from law enforcement and DHS when there's an allegation of abuse or there's a suspicion that a child has been abused. Usually one or both of those agencies will contact us to set up an assessment. And we provide a medical assessment as well as a forensic interview for child abuse victims in the Gorge. We are excited to be able to find a permanent home. We've been around since 2009, and we currently occupy a building that's 1,500 square feet. We've totally outgrown our space in the needs of our community. So we're looking to right size our space with this building on Wasco Loop, which offers great access to the freeway, in and off the freeway for our partners, community partners that are coming from outside of Hood River area. It's also centrally located, but not in an area that is so visible. So it's, as you can imagine, the work that we do is pretty sensitive, and we're pretty careful about what kind of information gets out there of the families that we see. So the building that we're talking about offers a semi-private visits, so that you're not driving down the street and everybody's looking to see that you're at Safe Space and wondering what you're doing there. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. What the services that we provide are vital in the child abuse investigation. We provide information for law enforcement for them to be able to bring charges to whoever's harming a child. We also provide information to child welfare so that they can make decisions on how to keep the child safe. We work with both of those agencies pretty closely as we get our referrals directly from them. We're not at a point where we're getting referrals from the public in general. We're getting them from those 2 agencies. I think that's it. I'm happy to answer any more questions, but I want to let Jeff talk a little bit more about our project. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jeff Dellis. I'm the architect for the project, and I live at 1219. My mailing address is 1219 Columbia Street, Hood River, Oregon, 97031. Thank you for considering this proposal. And I just wanted to reiterate something I thought was important from the land use submittal package, which is the fact that Safe Space is well aware of the potential changes that could occur around them in this light industrial zone. They're comfortable with that. We do have core space, as Beatrice mentioned, the forensic interview spaces. Those are sensitive. They need to be, private. We've intentionally centralized those within the building so that there are multiple spaces between them and exterior walls to mitigate noise from outside that might be occurring in the surroundings. And in addition to that, we'll be doing full perimeter sound treatment to those spaces for mitigation of noise from within inside the building. I guess it was sort of a circling back of our confidence that Safe Space will be a compatible neighbor in this light industrial zone.
All right, I appreciate that, Jeff. Any questions for the applicant from the commission? And okay, so let's hand it over then to Dustin. Do you want to add some more coming from the staff report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, from the report from staff that you were provided, again, this is file number 2227. The applicant is Safe Space Advocacy Center, who has requested a conditional use approval to locate essentially its use within the Wasco Loop light industrial area. The building is approximately 8,000 square feet. As outlined by the code, public facilities and uses which include public health services, or one, a facility which is necessary for the public health, safety, welfare of the community. Those uses in a light industrial zone are required to receive conditional use approval. That's why we're here today before the Planning Commission. You are the body to render decisions and findings of fact and compliance. You have the 43 pages of staff report that outline that. We look at towards Title 1706 when it comes to conditional uses. Interesting, in the analysis of this, most conditional uses and the analysis we give to them really have to do with we call negative externalities, the impacts that it can occur outside or from this use. And given really the nature of the use, when we talk about noise, heat, glare, impacts, compatibility, it really has a pretty light footprint as compared to what can be permitted in light industrial. So initially, as the staff, we ask the architect and applicant to ensure really that the uses remain compatible because of the potential impact that actually could occur on it. So in terms of our findings, we can't make any findings really that there is any perceived impact that that such a use would have on its surrounding neighbors. There's sufficient amount of parking in terms of development. The building is built. There is only really minor modifications that are intended to occur on the site. So in terms of landscaping, parking, grading, site access, they're all intact and we don't anticipate any adverse impacts from that. The application was submitted to the surrounding property owners as notice of this hearing. We received no comments. The application was also submitted to police, fire, and engineering, also with really no comments regarding the approval of the request. So you do have a recommendation to approve this request with conditions of approval on site, and included in your staff report. It's a pretty short list that really becomes really precursor to the applicant regarding time, or notice to the applicant regarding timeframes, requirements to adhere to the nature of the request, system development charges, really everything that is forward facing. So really no significant change to ensure compliance. So if you have any questions, I'm here to answer anything that you may have.
All right, appreciate that. Thank you, Director Nielsen. Okay, hands up. I see Commissioner Irving has a question.
Sure.
Wait, you just went back on mute.
Sorry. My biggest question is related to the future and I guess the impact of other uses on this use in the zone. I mean, Jeff commented on it, Dustin commented on it. I've seen in the county with some land use decisions where there's some acknowledgement with the approval of a particular use that there are uses that could be impactful around it. And I don't know, I'm just trying to figure out, this is a light industrial zone where they could potentially be testing UAV engines across the street or in the same building or so. And that is a use that I think we want to preserve and protect. So I'm trying to figure out how we make sure that the applicant is not going to come back to us and say that those type of uses are problematic in the future, I guess, is my biggest question.
I guess, so some of the use which we refer to in the county, especially with EFU land, it runs straight into right to farm applications. And as when you see non-farm dwellings approved or in the past were approved, they would be required to have really an easement or right to farm to hold those neighboring permitted uses harmless, if you will, to say we have to make sure that if we have conditional uses in EFU that that those uses that are intended for that zone, especially farming practices, can be continued and our non-farm dwellings are not an inhibitor to that primary use. I think that's kind of the county analogy that I can think of.
Yeah. So I guess I'm questioning, does it make sense for us to do something like that? Or do we condition the approval? Or do we acknowledge in the staff report or in the findings and have the applicant acknowledge that somehow? I mean, what process do we have to do anything like that? Guess a question for Dustin.
That could be a condition of approval. It's not necessarily an incumbent to gain compliance, but it is a conditional use subject to unique terms and conditions. So if there was a condition that the applicant acknowledge future land uses that may occur in the light industrial area and a willingness to hold them harmless, that could be that's generally what I came up with right now. So condition of approval. If you all found that kind of essential to forward an application, that could be something you could discuss.
Sure. Okay. I guess that was my only question.
All right. Appreciate that. Any other questions for staff? All right. So now what we'll run through is we will take public testimony on this first matter. So I will run through the order. First up, if you're a proponent of this project and you wish to testify, please raise your hand. That's either *9 or use the icon on the bottom of your screen. Okay, I see a hand up with Gorge Realty Group.
Can you all hear me all right?
Yep, we can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This is actually Alicia Nightingale. My mailing address is 1216 A Street in the Heights of Hood River. I was just wanting to state that I've had the opportunity to work with Beatrix in the past, just by previewing their space and hearing a ton about their organization through my partner, Tanner Hall. And having gone to their space, I can very much attest to the fact that they have outgrown their space. And with the work that they're doing and the amount of kiddos that they're helping, they really need new opportunity. And it's very challenging to find in kind of maybe the more traditional zonings. I know Tanner's been, like other agents, I'm sure, have been on the lookout for them because everybody is looking out for this organization. So I would really, I'm just in major support of them finding a good space, and they've been looking for a while, and this seems to be the right fit. So.
Thanks, Alicia. All right, next up, I see a hand raised with Ann Middenbeck. Go ahead, Ann.
Can you hear me?
We can hear
Hello?
you. Yep. Can you hear
Okay,
us?
great.
Yep.
Yeah, this is Ann. Yep, this is Ann Medenbach with Copper West Real Estate, and I'm representing Safe Space in the purchase of this building. And I would just like to reiterate what Alicia said about the lack of suitable space for this use, and that this building in particular, because of all of its location and its size and different entrances, is a great spot for them. And I just encourage the committee to approve the use. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Ann. Okay. I see no other hands. And if I could get you to lower your hand, that would be helpful. Let's now go to anyone who wishes to testify neutral to this project. Seeing none, I will move on to those opposed. If you are opposed, *9 or raise your hand. Okay, I don't see anyone opposed. Let me bring that now back to the applicant. The only question was the issue raised by Commissioner Irving around the adjacent uses. From that, if you have a chance to rebut that or any other issue raised.
For my part, I think, we've acknowledged that the surrounding zone can and will change. And so we're within the facility setting up these physical barriers, if you will, to our more sensitive spaces. I think perhaps maybe Beatrice could comment from her side what she sees for the future of Safe Space and how they interact with their neighbors.
Again, I'm going to say that the information that we gather at Safe Space is pretty sensitive. So we're very protective of the family. So all of the assessments happen indoors in an interior part of the building. I don't anticipate having any barriers with what's happening on the outside. Jeff's worked really hard to come up with some planning. We do some recording in there, but those are all going to be in interior, well insulated rooms that nothing that's going outside should affect it. We're not anticipating like having a lot of families hanging out outside or at any time. I mean, they come in, we do the assessment and they leave, so.
Okay. Commissioner Irving, any questions that you'd like to direct to the applicant?
Well, I mean, the commission hasn't necessarily discussed the concept, but I think it would make sense to me to add an additional condition acknowledging the zone and the possible uses in that zone in the agreement that, there's not going to, as long as the use is permitted and operating under those permitted characteristics, that there's not going to be any objections to those operations. And I guess that's if the applicant has any commentary on that, if they're open to a condition like that, that might be useful.
Any feedback?
Well, I don't really see a need for it, honestly. I think what we have in front of us is whether or not they meet the criteria of, conditional use in this case, which is if they're a public facility or public use. I'm not opposed to the extra condition, but I don't see a need for it.
I agree with you, Commissioner Powers.
That's what I was going to say.
All right, so I think we are good then with the applicant's testimony. What I can do now is let us move back to staff for a final recap before we close the meeting. Close the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Unless you have some questions for me, we really have nothing to add before the record is closed and you deliberate.
Okay. In that case, I will close the hearing and let's move into the deliberation. So, Bill, maybe make the argument why we would want to add this condition, this new condition.
Well, I think their use is an outlier with, and I'm just asking the question. I don't know that I would try and be exceptionally persuasive if all the commission has an opinion, but their particular type of use is certainly going to be an outlier to the other uses in that light industrial zone where they're doing manufacturing and assembly and testing and things like that. So I just had seen this concept before in some other land use decisions where the applicant made some acknowledgement of the surrounding environment and agreed to, accept it. And so I was.
But by moving into an L1 area, don't they automatically assume that risk?
One would think that they do.
Okay.
So, Bill, are you more concerned
but it's the
about-
same thing as building a house in the farm zone, right? You can't complain about your neighbor spraying.
Mhm.
So this is kind of I'm asking if we should have a corollary here.
I mean, it seems
Sorry,
like the whole
Commissioner Brown.
it seems like the whole point of moving into the area where they are is that they don't care about that and that it's more conducive to the application of what they do in their building, in that there aren't a lot of residential things happening. It's very unlikely that anybody other than the people that already work down there, who probably largely are uninterested in what's going on in their building, this particular building, are going to have a problem with it. And I can't imagine why anybody at Safe Space would A, complain about what's going on around them, or B, have anything that they could do about it in the future were they to complain.
And furthermore, it seems like they've taken steps in the design to ensure that there's not external noise. It looks like they've been moving windows and doors to ensure that there's, better access to the building and more secure access, more private access. It's not something that's going to be a giant undertaking for them. It seems pretty clear that it's a good spot for them.
I mean, Bill, like, what's the worst case scenario that you imagine, I guess, for clarification?
I agree with everything that you guys are saying. There's another executive director, there's another something, and 10 years from now, they said we approve some light industrial use that generates noise and sound and glare or whatever happens to be applicable in that zone. And they say, look, stop doing this. It's impactful for our business.
Like, as in if someone else wanted to do something in that industrial area.
There's buildings to the north of them, to the south of them.
Right.
This exact building could be demised in the future, and they might not need all this space. I think there's a second floor on this building that I don't know whether they're planning to occupy it or not. I mean, I would expect their user characteristics are a more typical office user than light industrial user.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I'm asking this question.
But it wouldn't be turned into an office building at some point in the future where this would be an issue. Like, this seems like we're talking about crazy future stuff. Super crazy future stuff.
I mean, I'm familiar with the site. I'm familiar with the adjacent buildings. I'm familiar, and there are literally UAV companies around here. They're making beer and wine across the street, or were at some point. Smells, odors, truck traffic. I mean, typical light industrial operating characteristics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't seem like there's any harm for us to have the applicant acknowledge those things, but I'm one voice. So that's why I was asking the question.
Yeah. Anyone else want to weigh in?
Well, I'll just say what I said originally. I'm certainly not against it. I don't think it's necessary, but if we add it, I'm perfectly fine with that. And I think Bill has been a little more persuasive with the idea of, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, all kinds of things could change in terms of who's in what space and what kinds of noises are created. So just a recognition that there could be potential different impacts later, and that's accepted because it's a light industrial zone is a pretty mild condition to add. Doesn't hurt anything.
Okay, I'll go along with that. Thanks, Vice Chair Powers. I think we certainly want to keep that as a light industrial zone and not be constrained by any of the developments coming in. So I'm okay with a small additional consideration there on that topic. So I think the way that we would ask staff then is to draft something, propose something back, and we'll include that in the approved conditions of approval. So any other comments, questions, topics?
I just want to add that I think the overriding consideration for this whole case is whether or not it's the public facility and uses. And looking at that criteria, the fact that we had that letter saying it was pretty much all publicly funded, works with law enforcement and child welfare services, it was pretty clear. Yes, so there's nothing to disagree with in any of the criteria.
Right. I certainly agree with the conditional use here.
Mhm.
Okay, any other comments or I would entertain a motion on this topic?
I'll make a motion that we approve file 2022-27 applicant Safe Space Children's Advocacy Center for a conditional use with the staff report and findings and approval criteria as stated, with the addition of a criteria to be drafted by staff that acknowledges that there could be future uses in the zone, which will be more typical light industrial uses, and the applicant acknowledges that and agrees that they would, I guess, not have concern with that in the event that happens.
All right. Commissioner Irving has put forward a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
All right, Vice Chair Powers is seconded. So discussion, any questions about the motion? All right, let's go forward with our voting. If I could go through the list and have everybody vote, that'd be great. Let's start with Commissioner Irving.
Aye.
Commissioner Stefina.
Aye.
Commissioner Hoffman.
Aye.
Commissioner Petzing.
Aye.
Commissioner Powers.
Aye.
Who did I miss?
Commissioner Mitchell.
Commissioner Mitchell.
Vote aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion's passed. Thank you, Beatrice and Jeff, for attending tonight. Appreciate the effort here. Good luck with your project.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, with that, then we will move to our second topic of the evening. Now, has anyone joined since we introduced the meeting and need the commissioners to rewrite the recitals? So I am looking, and
I'm new and I don't need a restatement of the procedures.
thank you, Dan. All right. In that case, we've already gone through the recitals talking about the order of events. We're going to use the same order of events this time around. So let me just open up this portion of the meeting. All right, so tonight we'll consider the next item on tonight's agenda. This is file 2022-31, an application by Columbia Gorge Capital requesting a conditional use for 21 unit mixed use residential development and a zone map change. I will now ask all commissioners to disclose any ex parte conflicts of interest and bias in this matter. If I could go back down through the list, let's start at the top. I see Commissioner Vice Chair Powers. You're on mute.
I have none.
Commissioner Stepina.
I have none.
Commissioner Hoffman.
I actually do have some things to disclose. I live in the notice area for this particular project. My partner and I own a house nearby. He and I both received the notice. We discussed the notice, even though I said we should probably not talk about this. Sometimes it's hard to get your significant other to not talk about stuff with you. We walk by the site on a regular basis because we live right across the street. And that being said, I still believe that I'm able to review this plan and the staff report without a biased opinion on the particular development. That's it.
All right, thanks, Commissioner Hoffman. Commissioner Mitchell.
I have none.
Commissioner Petzing.
I have none.
Commissioner Irving.
I have a disclosure of ex parte contact. I was approached by another real estate broker, Tara Snyder, who asked me about this application a few weeks ago. And I didn't have the packet yet. I wasn't familiar with it at all. And I let her know, or any person she was in contact with, that they need to basically come to the meeting and submit written testimony. So that's my only disclosure. Ex parte, I don't have any conflict of interest or bias.
Okay. Myself, I did actually visit the site. I walked around the site this afternoon. I was interested in a couple of things. Was, what is the street look like down on Cascade, and also what impacts on views might be from above on Oak Street. What I'd say is down on Cascade, I saw a couple of single family residences on either end of that block, but obviously apartment buildings in the middle, but very low scale apartment buildings. One thing I was particularly interested in was the parking situation right now, and it looked like on the lower lot that 10 out of, let's say, 14 spaces were filled. And on the upper lot, 4 out of 8 spaces were filled. So it seems like 3/4 of the parking was filled at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I just was wondering about that. I wanted to go look at that. And that's all I have to report. Okay, with that then, I will ask if, okay, does anyone in the audience or the commission member wish to question any commissioner on the disclosure of ex parte contact, bias, or conflict in disinterest, or otherwise challenge the participation of any member of the commission?
Mr. Chair, I see one hand, Robert and Teresa Beard.
Yep, go ahead if we can promote them.
Hi, can you hear us?
Yes, we can. We got a bit of an echo.
Okay.
Turn down your volume of the, there you go.
Is that better?
Yes.
Nope. Okay. You can hear us, okay?
Actually, if you go back to where you were, that was better.
I'm going to turn mine off. Will you stay on?
Yeah, if you have 2 devices going, that'll do that. So turn the speaker off.
Okay. You can hear us now?
Yes.
Okay, so we were having a really...
You have Robert Beard also located on this call that is probably providing some feedback.
Can you hear us now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
We had a really hard time getting on, so we just kind of got on and we're trying to get a feel for what's going on, whether there's opposition or if everybody is in agreement or.
Okay, we're a long way from that discussion. Right now, what we're doing is we're just introducing the topic, the case, and we are identifying the Planning Commission participants to make sure everybody on the Planning Commission can participate in this meeting tonight.
Okay.
So we're about to go into that, and then we will go through the applicant's presentation, staff report, proponents of the project, neutral testimony, and opposed testimony from the public. So we'll get to that in a little bit.
Okay.
We have no objection to the panel members.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, you too. I see another hand up with Robert Henshaw. You can go ahead.
Hello there. This is Shayla Fleischer at 721 Cascade Street. Actually using my husband's computer for the Zoom call. But I just would like to respectfully ask one more time for clarification that there is no one on the Planning Commission who's a member of doing business with or will be doing business with any kind with Columbia Gorge Capital LLC or its subsidiaries of Columbia Gorge Capital LLC now or prior to this proposed development?
Right, that's what we were disclosing, and everybody identified they don't have any conflicts or biases.
Okay, I just wanted to just make sure that and clarify that. Thank you.
All right, excellent. All right, with that then, if there's no further questions, we will move into the applicant's presentation. So if we could promote members of the applicant panel, and feel free to share your screen, get on camera and or share your screen, and then walk us through the project.
And I think we have a representing applicant, Locke Litwer. Locke, you have members of your team also available if you want to promote them now or cue them as you see fit. It's just really up to you. So I know there's a number of people out there for traffic and some other technical. Just if you want them promoted now or wait, that's up to you.
Yeah, we may as well promote them now. I'm not sure if you need to do that or somebody else does, but the two people who may be called on to provide technical guidance here are Ria Fliskowski of DKS traffic engineer and Mark Engenberg, who's our architect.
All right. With that, you are invited to tell us about this project.
Outstanding. Let me see if I can share my screen here. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay, well, first of all, again, my name is Locke Litwer. I live at 2204 Sherman Ave, just right by the Safeway over on Cascade. And I want to say thank you for taking some time this evening to talk with me about the project that we are proposing. As you can see here, company is Columbia Gorge Capital. We're a workforce housing company. We're proposing a multifamily residence with mixed use at 715 Cascade Avenue. Let me see if I'm smarter than the slide deck. Here we go. Great. Today, just to give you a quick overview of what we're doing. This is a project in the downtown business district. It's not in the historic district. We're proposing 21 new residences. It's going to be a mix of 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms. On the subject lots, there are currently 12 existing residences, a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units. There's also proposed 216 square feet of retail, commercial use. So it is there, but it's not a significant percentage of the square footage. And parking will be below and behind the structure. As you can see, there's a pass through there. A couple things I just want to make really clear up front, because this is a question that I've been asked. The existing apartments will be remaining. The tenants who are currently living there will absolutely be staying. And in fact, we intend to give them an opportunity, if they so choose, to move into newer units when this is completed. Few notes about us. All right, top left corner, that's me, Locke Litwer, with the family. I mean, you can see Cal Blake right next to me in the middle there. I am from Hood River, or excuse me, I live in Hood River, have for a number of years, from Oregon. Cal, I'm still trying to get him to move to Hood River, but it's hard these days. So he's unfortunately in West Lynn still. Bottom left corner, that's the existing properties to orient everybody who doesn't know to the general area we're talking about. And then in the bottom right, you'll see 3 examples of the kinds of workforce housing projects we've done in other rural Oregon cities. These are all actually in Newport, these projects. Those are sort of cottage clustery type development. But so we do workforce housing. Our focus is rural Oregon cities. We build, own, and operate with a 10-year or longer plan to hold anything that we build. Everything is targeted towards that moderate income or workforce housing, which I recognize is a term of art, type of residences. The reasons we do it are twofold. First of all, this is something which we feel strongly about. We have all the members of my organization, both of us have struggled to find housing for our families. We also like the process of building and find great satisfaction in being able to know that we've made an impact in people's lives through creating places they can call home. We also think it's a good business. You know, we think that there's very dramatically a level of underservedness for that middle of the market. Lots of folks are building luxury. Some folks are building houses that are subsidized. Not very many people are tackling the middle of the stack. And so we see that as an opportunity, particularly given that we hold things for a very long time. So we build them for quality. Last thing here, are we secretly Airbnb? You know, folks have definitely asked us, hey, you know, are you going to put an Airbnb hotel in this building? The answer is very resoundingly absolutely not. Not only because it's not our business model and not our mission, but also because, frankly, if we want to be in hospitality, we will be in hospitality and do hotel. We don't think that Airbnb isn't, or that kind of short-term rental model is an efficient way to conduct business if you want to be in hospitality. So I just want to put that to bed from the outset. All right, so I mentioned workforce housing a few times. I'd like to orient to really what we're talking about here. I know that the City of Hood River and in some of these meetings has had a lot of grappling with how do we make this town affordable to folks who live here. And so some analysis that goes into that is, you know, moderate income housing. What is it? The city defines it as 60% to 120% of the median family income. Folks who make that can spend up to 30% of their income before they're considered to be housing cost burdened. So what are those benchmarks? Those benchmarks, sort of, the 60% is the end of where you see subsidy, and the beginning of where that missing middle comes in. You know, that's at the 80th percentile. I'm sorry, right there in the middle. You can probably see it. I'll put can you see my mouse here? Right there, great. So what the city standard is hey, you know, if the rent is $1,540 or below, folks who are making 80% of the median family income can afford that without being housing burdened on the rental side, right? So the other question we're asked is, well, how do we know? How do we know that this is what you're going to do, and you're not going to just turn around and build luxury housing all up and down this thing, and you know, and have really, really expensive places? How can we feel good about that? And you know, my response to that's twofold. You know, first of all, you know, I re-articulate. We think this is a good place to be because it's a mission that we want to meet, and it's good business. But if you really want, you know, some proof, you know, look at what we already have done. You know, we started our company in January of 2000 because we had terrible timing and didn't know the COVID was coming. But since then, you know, we've built a number of houses and a number of acquired residences, such as this one right downtown. And we've had units turn there. You know, we absolutely have had the opportunity, you know, to put in granite countertops and sub-zero refrigerators and do all the things to make these really high-end units. And we've certainly done maintenance. There's a lot of maintenance in that building, but we haven't done that. And in fact, our rents today run between $1,150 and $1,400 a month for the rental portion. Obviously, utilities are different. And you know, if you go back to that chart, you can see that's affordable to anybody making, you know, even less than 80% of the median family income here in the river. So I say, look at what we've done. And I think it's a good indicator of what we will do. And the other question that we get asked, and I'll just tackle this here, is, you know, hey, you know, would you provide a guarantee? You know, can you guarantee us, in, you know, in some legally binding way that you're going to, you know, make affordable units, right? And for folks who are, you know, who don't deal with this every day, they may not be familiar with the fact that when you talk about affordable housing, a lot of what you're talking about is low-income housing tax credits, direct subsidies, you know, tax grants or tax abatements, land that is contributed to the project by the public. We don't take any of that. Everything we do on a commercial basis with a small group of investors who want to see a decent return, but also want to sleep well at night. And so, you know, we say, look, we can't guarantee a specific rent because, frankly, we don't know what the costs are going to be going into this yet due to the tremendous fluctuation in inputs. You know, but look at what we've done. You know, have a conversation with us, and we hope you'll come away satisfied that this is what we want to be doing. This is what we intend to do, and you know, given the opportunity, is what we will do. All right, so we'll talk about what we want to do a little bit here. Let's talk about what we could currently do in the existing zoning. Okay, it's currently commercial 1. And looking around the block here, you see short-term rentals. You see furnished units and B&Bs operate on a nightly or monthly basis for rentals like a hotel. There's professional offices. There is some limited residential nearby in the C1 zoning. This legacy detached single-family homes. We could build a curb-to-curb daycare facility. We wouldn't, but somebody could. You can pay parking, a 3-story medical facility, maybe even a little taller, or even utility pumping substations. These are all allowed currently with no parking necessarily. It can all be paid for, right? Using the in-lieu fee. So that's what's allowed in the current zoning, and the Planning Commission wouldn't necessarily look at it. So that's kind of level setting, what we're trying to move from. Okay. So why are we here? Why are we talking? Why are we spending everybody's evening having this conversation? 2 reasons: rezone and mixed use conditional use permits. Why are we asking for a rezone? Density equals affordability. The way that we get to be able to charge the rents they charge is by amortizing the cost of the land, which is very substantial over a large number of units, a relatively large number of units. This has the dual benefits of bringing down the cost per unit, the cost per door, and thus allowing us to charge rents we charge, and also allows us to make that offering, to have this workforce housing that is engineered or designed to be attractive to people who are able to spend moderate income levels of rent on housing. Also, C2, unlike C1, has no maximum unit cap or minimum square foot unit rule. Under the current zoning, maximum of 3 additional dwellings to be built on that whole northern half of the property before we'd be exceeding the allowance. Going to C2, it's all just based on what we get in the height and with the design that we're doing. Reason number 2, why mixed use? Preserves on-site parking. People care about parking, and we're trying to do as much as we can to balance the needs of putting cars places with the needs of putting people places. It protects the residential unit counts and allows for a potential amenity for residents downstairs, while also creating a driveway. So here without cutting out residences. And what I mean by cutting out residences, this red outline here, this is the footprint of the area that you see on the upper stories that is currently dedicated to apartments, but would not be able to be dedicated to apartments on a ground floor application. This represents five dwellings, right? 5 dwellings that if we had to use that ground floor for residences would not be able to be built. Because we're using the mixed use, we can elevate the building an additional small amount, 10 feet. What does that give us? It gives us the ability to have 7 additional parking spaces on site. That gives us the ability to have a lobby that has, all the ADA elevator, the mail, to have some room for a really robust bike parking. We'll talk about that a little later. And of course, that all important driveway to the rear where all the parking is, so that you're not seeing a building that has a giant parking lot in the front, which I don't think adds to the character of the neighborhood at all. Let me move on here. And by the way, if anybody's questions at any points, please feel free to either write them down, ask me later, or if it's really urgent, let me know. We'll talk about it. Here's just an illustration of how that design was built to facilitate more parking than otherwise would be allowed while retaining the same number of units. And you can see we built a podium over the parking here, and that unlocked a whole lot of space. Again, it's a balancing act. What can we do to have the most number of units with the most parking at the same time? All right, we're gonna start into the process here. We're asking for a few things. There's a lot that you folks are going to have to think about. Here's a roadmap for the first part: the quasi-judicial zone change. Here's the criteria. We're going to walk through it. I'll try and keep tabs on where we are and how the flow chart's going along the way. But if at any time you have questions or you lose track of where we are, let me know, and we'll come back and visit. Criteria 1, right? The question is this change unreasonably harmful or incompatible with existing uses? We think that this is actually very compatible with existing uses, and we illustrate it this way. So now the blue one, this is the proposed site over here. As we move around this site, if you look to the north, there's 28 condo multifamily. A lot of those units are short-term rentals. Some of them are second homes. Some of them are permanent residences, but it's a whole C2 zone block with that mix of short-term residences and others. Moving clockwise around, number 3, you have a furnished units rental for one night or up to a month. It's sort of like a hotel, but designated differently. Number 8 over here, you have a confectionery, which I understand they make or sell candies and stuff, and there's some offices upstairs, I think. Number 2 is the former Naked Winery. Also, this is all C2 here in that corner, as you can see. Obviously, a winery, tasting room, pretty intense use or retail. Lots of impact there. 7 is the existing residences, the 12 that we talked about earlier. Number 9, these are the Ethan Beck townhomes and short-term rentals. I want to highlight this really. We'll talk more about that later. But again, this is C1, right? We have the ability to build 3 additional units in that north half without a zone change, right? The only way it makes sense to build anything new, given the site prep costs and all the other things that go into building, if we can't get more units in there, is to go large and go luxury, and we don't want to do that. We're not going to do that, but somebody else might if we get let go of that lot. Number 4, this is a bed and breakfast hotel. And number 6 over here is one of those legacy detached single family homes, still in the C1 zoning. They've been there a long time, great members of the community, and they're right over there. So this, really a very broad spectrum of uses on this block, from very intense to not as intense. All right. I also mentioned earlier, this is in the downtown business district, just to illustrate where in the district we are. This is the city map that shows the district. As you can see, we're flanked to the east, west, and north by other blocks that are in the downtown business district. This is a detail of the block we're on right there. The only adjacency we have that is not the downtown business district is those Ethan Beck townhomes to the south. Question to ask, is this mixed use development appropriate in the downtown business district for the C2 application? We think so. Let's see if I can, there we go. All right, criteria number 2. So, are one of these conditions true? There's 3 conditions, one of them needs to be true. We're going to make it easy and just get rid of the first one. There was no mistake made in the original zone, so non-applicable. All right, we're going to tackle the second one here. Criteria number 2, specifically the housing needs analysis, action item 1.1. So since I think you're familiar with this, in case you're not, the housing needs analysis said, hey, if we're going to create the dwellings necessary within the urban growth boundaries in the coming years, we need to build 297 additional dwellings, not in Hood River, but in C2 zoned areas on levels above the ground floor, right? So 297. Now, I don't know since 2015 how many have been built that meet that criteria, but I'd ask you to make your best judgment as to whether that number is closer to 0 or closer to 297. I think it's probably closer to 0. Sorry. Sorry, a little interruption there. Specifically, action item 1.1 directs the city to, when you're looking at rezoning, let's do that and allow moderate high density single family detached and multifamily development. Again, we're coming in for multifamily. We can't do the multifamily without the rezone. We think that this is a really good opportunity to do that. And they go even further in this policy document and say, hey, when selecting the land, look for land that is 1, vacant, 2, along transportation corridors, 3, with existing water service, 4, in areas of current or planned access to retail and services. This checks every single one of those boxes. So we think that that is a check mark. You need to be the judge. Additionally, this aligns with Goal 10. Here are the applicable goals and policies. Specifically, there's a housing need. We need to build housing, get people to not be so housing burdened. It also says specifically looking for development of a mixture of new housing types, And part of that is the price point that meet the needs of all segments of the population, not just the wealthy and not just people who get assistance. And we think that this scratches that itch as well. And then lastly, there are the application technologies, talking about greater freedom of design, increased density, and the economy of land use will be encouraged. You don't get better economy of land use than turning a parking lot into a multifamily building. It's just, that's as economical as it gets. All right, so we think there's a check mark there. In case you're not all the way there, let's look at the third the third criteria here. Again, one of these three needs to be true. Criteria 3, have conditions changed? Well, since 2010, we've seen around 1,400 new residents come to Hood River, the city of Hood River. I don't think we've seen anywhere close to that many residences created in the city. Again, that question about are we closer to that number or the goose egg? But the other interesting statistic to look at is that in 2011, look at these dark bars here. This is the spread of affordability amongst those MFI numbers, right? It was kind of evenly distributed. Then fast forward to 2019 with that orange, and you see it starts to go up and to the right, people really started moving inventory out of those areas that are affordable to moderate income households and into that more luxury category. And the projections are that by 2028, that trend is only going to be significantly more exacerbated. And then the second part is the proposed zoning more suitable than the current zoning? Well, again, we talked about, hey, we get 3 dwellings with C1 or a 3-story professional office building. There's no minimum square feet per dwelling, so we can get a whole lot more residences under C2. Allows densification and multifamily as called for in Goal 10. Again, we're talking about a delta of 18 more units than with C1. So we think it is, the conditions have changed and the proposed zoning is more suitable. So we took the liberty of putting a check mark there. There are a few other factors that we are asked to contemplate, you're asked to contemplate when looking at a rezone, and we're just going to walk through those really quickly because I think they are important. First, with public health. Housing is a real driver of public health. I think that's very well understood. There are 4 pathways to better health outcomes and healthcare costs that are related to housing affordability. The stability pathway, there was a study actually here in the state of Oregon with 10,000 people who had unstable housing. And they found that when they provided those folks with affordable housing, Medicaid expenditures went down 12%. But more importantly, the use of outpatient primary care increased 20%, while emergency department use declined by 18%, right? So you saw, as folks are in one place, they get a primary care physician and they start getting chronic issues dealt with. And they stop going, being frequent flyers in emergency rooms. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but it's a very well quantified outcome. Quality and safety. When there isn't new housing inventory, people start renting basements in older buildings and things like that. Just really up front here, those are much more likely to have issues with water leaks, with lead paint, pest infestations, things like that. Lots of things that are related to asthma. And again, this is not my opinion. This is documented, and you can go to that link at the bottom if you'd like to know more. Particularly for older folks, exposure to high and low temperatures is correlated with adverse health events, particularly cardiovascular. And then finally, residential crowding is very closely linked to physical illness through infectious disease and psychological distress. Affordability pathway. This is a really easy one to understand. Folks have to choose often between paying for their housing, paying for their nutrition, or paying for their health care. The last thing they stop spending money on is their housing. So before they lose their housing, they're going to start eating worse or eating less. They're going to stop seeing their doctor. They're going to stop getting treated. And we really don't think that's a good outcome for our community. And then finally, neighborhood. We'll talk about this a little bit more later, but access to safe transportation, particularly without a car, access to grocery, access to open spaces and parks, highly correlated with outcomes. That's the obvious stuff. But the less obvious stuff, the stuff that's not really apparent on its face, is these social characteristics of a neighborhood. When you have situations like segregation, concentration of high crime neighborhoods, and not a lot of diversity in terms of social capital, that has adverse outcomes for the potential of people who are growing up there. By contrast, when you have neighborhoods that are really diverse, you tend to have lower crime, you tend to have really better outcomes for kids in particular. And so we think that's very compelling. And this neighborhood would definitely qualify as a good place for that. Safety, we touched on safety briefly. I want to draw your attention to this lifetime odds of death by cause, not just because I'm morbid, but because it's very salient here. This is in the year 2020. Your chances of dying in a motor vehicle crash, 1 in 101. That's as compared to as a pedestrian, where it's 1 in 541, or as a bicyclist, which is 1 in 3,396. Those are pretty stark statistics. So we look at that and we say, okay, we're right here. This is the area we're highlighting. This is the walking map of Hood River, right? When you see those darker lines, those are streets that have sidewalks. It may be stating the obvious, sidewalks make pedestrians safer, right? So we are flanked on 3 sides by sidewalks. What does that mean? It means that when people are not using their cars and they're out doing the right thing and they're walking to work, they're walking to the park, they're walking to school, they're walking to their grocery store, they're much less likely to be in one of these neighborhoods that don't have sidewalks and have an adverse events. So that's safety strategy number 1 and 2. Reduce number of vehicle trips because, again, 1 in 101. And then when they are walking, try and make it a safer place to walk. All right. Let's start with safety with number 4 here. Again, we're on that green star. These dotted lines are routes that are either have dedicated bike lanes or that have marked shared bike lanes, right? So, Safeway is less than a mile. It's 0.9 miles from this location, right? Folks are absolutely able to bike to get groceries on that. And when they're doing so, they can do so on a route that is marked for and or has dedicated access for bikes for their e-bike so that they can do that and they can do it easily and safely. The classic problem for renters is that renters often don't have so much storage space that maybe having a bike is more difficult for them. So we have specific design strategies baked into this building to really make it easy for our tenants to lean on those bikes, to use those bikes as their preferred mode of transportation. We want to lean into safety and keep our residents doing well. Welfare, not a defined term in code, right? But it is there as something we can consider. So we took a quick look at it. We think, hey, if folks have insecure housing, that's not to their welfare, right? Having more folks who are housing secure probably increases the welfare of our community. I can't tell you how many folks I know who talk about how, hey, I had to close my pizzeria for these days because I couldn't find people who work there. Or, I look at Betts. Betts is, had a continuous record of being open for, a long time. And then recently they've had to pare that back because they can't find the employees. And a big part of the reason that the employees who work in service jobs aren't living here or aren't available for those jobs is because they're not living here because they can't afford to. So it has a real impact on the economy. And then brass tacks, unless we want to have unconstrained sprawl and, cut down orchards and really grow that UGB, the only path to solving this problem is density. And there's also a legal consideration there, obviously, in Oregon. We're limited as to how much we're able to push that UGB until we achieve density. So I think that is contemplated. 4 more here. We're going to talk about conservation of property values and direction of building development. There has been substantial new development on this block, and development largely has been pushing to the east for that commercial use. Highlighted in our block area, I know we talked about those Ethan Beck homes with the Airbnbs downstairs. We talked about Evoke Winery. I mentioned the new confectionery. This is happening. It's this is the path that things are going in. So I think it comports with the natural direction of progress. And as that's been happening, this is a chart of home values, property values in Hood River, in the city of Hood River during that time period. Just for reference point, this is 2012 right here. Obviously, 2008 things went sour and then went down, and then from 2012 onward, it's been up and to the right, and that's not projected to really change dramatically either. So we think that property values are conserved, and we think we're in the direction of progress. The standard says peculiar suitability for particular purpose, I think that this is actually a unique suitability situation. We have a parking lot, really underutilized land from a residential standpoint. It's got all the things. It's got the water. It's got the corridor. It's got the services. We went through those before, right? I don't think there's anywhere else that is purchasable right now for developments. There might be some land that's out there, but it's not for sale. That meets these criteria. And then the character of the area. Let's talk about that for a moment here. Again, we looked at this. I just want to kind of repost that for you. What's surrounding us? Is this in keeping with it? Multifamily, retail, other dense applications happening around us. And then looking at really these big buildings that are in the area here. This is very much in the strike zone for that. All right, so there's a whole lot of check marks there. Let's move on. Landscaping. Okay, we're going to walk through some things here. I'm going to try and make it pretty quick because we got a lot of material that you have to consider. We're required to do 5%. Which is 986 square feet. We're proposing to landscape 2,960 square feet. So really very much substantially more than the requirements. Additionally, we have frontage on Oak and Cascade. We're proposing to do, again, very substantial upgrades to those in terms of introducing street trees, upgraded sidewalks, low slung shrubs, things like that, ground cover, all native, and we'll talk about that later. Transportation circulation, there's a lot of things here. Again, I'll try and walk through it pretty quickly. So as I talked about a moment ago, we're moving the driveway in Cascade a little bit. It's the northern property. Cascade is a collector street. It requires theoretically 100 feet of separation between driveways. I think we're slightly under that here, but the traffic engineer looked at it closely and said that she does not anticipate any risks affiliated with that. On the south side on Oak, we're going to actually be improving where Oak is a arterial. It currently has 2 street cuts. We're going to reduce that to 1. So we'll be reducing the number of places where traffic is coming off of and going onto that arterial road. We're going to be making the sidewalk safer and again, just improving the look of the whole place. All right, next up, joint and cross access. So there is joint access between the north and south properties. So joint use of the parking and then access via stairway between the two. Just because of the elevation changes and the programs that are already in place adjacent to us, extending that joint use and access to adjacent properties really isn't feasible. We did look at it. We actually had a conversation with one of the neighbors, and we're, without significant changes to plan, which we're certainly willing to talk to her about. We're not proposing that at this time. The proposed use is not considered a major traffic generator, and like I said, internal access assist is not applicable or viable for project this scale. Driveway design. Talked about the consolidation. One thing to note. On the northern access that is designed for ADA compliance, that building will be ADA compliant. The existing 12-unit building was not built to be ADA compliant, and so we're not going to be reworking the driveway there to that end. Phase development not applicable. Let's move on. There's a pretty picture of the building if anyone wants to see it. Non-conforming access features and reverse frontage. It is not there is no reverse frontage, and there are no non-conforming access features. Again, another pretty picture. All right, the IAMP overlay zone. So I know there are folks here who may not be as conversant as the commissioners. IAMP is the Interchange Area Management Plan. This deals with how you manage traffic onto and off of the highway, the freeways. We are within the plan area. We're not within a limited access block. So there's gonna be some relevant findings later in this report with the traffic analysis letter that get more into detail. But just so you know, per the Hood River thresholds, if the increase in trip generation is less than 250 daily trips and 25 peak hour trips, there's no traffic impact analysis required. Our engineer does say, or our engineer, the engineer has said that proposed developments estimated to generate daily total trips of 241, with 22 total AM peak trips and 24 total PM peak trips. Again, not triggering that requirement for a transportation impact analysis. Bikes, big smile on my face for this one. I love bikes. All right, so let's talk about the standard. The standard is one long-term parking space per 4 units. With 24 units, there's a requirement for 6 parking spaces for bikes. That's what you see, these 6 bikes here. This is what we're actually doing right here. All these, we're in 22 indoor enclosed parking spots for bikes that are secure. Again, we recognize that this is not Kansas. This is not a flat community. I think I enjoy going up that hill to the heights about as much as anybody does on my bike. And that's why e-bikes are our friends. So we are also providing charging in those storage areas for those folks who want to have e-bikes. And again, we talked about how tenants and rentals don't tend to have as much storage space as folks who have garages and in single-family detached homes and maybe income pressured already. It doesn't make sense for 21 rental units to have 21 sets of bike tools. So just like you have downtown, with that pedestal with bike tools, we're going to provide some on-site secured bike tools for folks to do routine maintenance. But in case that's not sufficient, within 0.4 miles of this location, there are at least 3 bike repair shops that folks could take their bike to very easily on sidewalks if they need to. So we think we checked that box pretty well as well. All right, so this is a proposed conditional use. It triggers a site plan review. Just by way of reminder, I think you know this, but for those folks who are not commissioners, site plan review requires clear and objective criteria. And so that means, it's really, it's not a subjective conversation about, well, how do I feel about this? It doesn't meet the criteria, it does not. So we'll just walk through all of these and talk about how we think we're compliant with them. So harmful effects. Right, so the fine print here, we're not supposed to have harmful effects. However, we don't think we do it. The retail component there is pretty small. It says less than 4% of the total floor area. Limited impact. Probably not a part of your consideration as to whether there's harmful effects in this overall project. Nonetheless, we don't want to be a bad neighbor, so we did take a lot of measures to try to mitigate whatever impacts there may be. There has been expressed concern about neighbors' northerly views. We've ensured that no neighbors that are not us are going to have their northerly view of Mount Adams obscured by our development. It's just not going to happen, not with where we're located and how we're building. We have fully enclosed trash and recycling because you're required to screen, but also because nobody likes skunks and raccoons competing with you for access to the waste disposal. We'll talk more about building cladding a little later. I know Mark has put a lot of thought into that. But we want to make sure, just to say, we want to make sure we came up with a cladding that references both the downtown commercial stuff and the residential use to the west, and that really kind of has a design blending of the two. And Mark will talk more about that. Additionally, as you look at the massing in a moment here, you'll see that we really did what we could on the corners at the top to make the apparent massing as minimal as possible while still serving our mission. And again, we talked about parking. It's located entirely at the rear of the building. That's a best practice for just about every group that thinks about urban planning. It does cost us square footage and by way of a driveway underneath the building. It puts additional costs into it. We think it's worthwhile. And then we talked about bicycle and pedestrian circulation, access, and safety previously in this presentation, so we won't duplicate it here. Nuisance and plan consistency. So under nuisance, we're talking about, hey, an individual person or group of people who are adversely affected. The general thing we look at are odors, vibrations, traffic beyond normal, sound, things like that. Bottom line, there's not going to be anything here that causes odors or vibrations or any traffic beyond what's normally expected in a commercial 1 or commercial 2 zone area. There will be construction, and there are rules that we'll be compliant with around when that construction happens and what the noise levels are when that does happen. Again, really trying to be good neighbors. Plan consistency. Again, this proposal provides approximately 7% of the mixed-use multifamily that the housing needs analysis calls for. It's consistent with housing needs analysis action item 1.1, as well as goal 10 of the comprehensive plan, which was approved by the city council. So we do feel it is consistent. Scale. There's a lot of subcategories here. We'll go through them. They're listed on the right there. All right, configuration towards the street and landscaping improvements. We'll go real quick here if we can. This is oriented towards the street. You've seen it in the photos. Mark will talk more about that. We've talked about landscaping. I don't think there's anything more to cover on this slide than has already been covered to meet those criteria. Parking for residents. All right, so we were able to provide 23 off-street spots between the 2 or the 3 tax lots. Additionally, there's a 24, including the dedicated ADA off-street spot. That yields a ratio of 0.72. The Hood River rules do allow for us to do in lieu. We're going to do 21. So we have 23 of 44 required met on site, and 21 will be using the in lieu rules to satisfy. Additionally, just again, we have those 22 indoor e-bike parking spots at Power. We will have EV charging on site, electric vehicle charging on site, and we're working on finding a car sharing partner. I know the city has 5; they're not currently being used a whole lot, but we're looking at figuring out how can we really integrate all of these things to empower our residents to stay out of their cars when at all possible, but still recognizing, hey, sometimes you need a car. And we want to make that possible. If we can have a resident, not have to make a car payment, not have to make a car insurance payment, not pay for oil changes, and all that stuff, and instead only pay for those discrete times when they really need 2 or 3 hours in a car, we think that's good for the residents. We think that's good for the community. Proximity to open spaces. Folks, this is Hood River. The yellow star is us. The green stars are open spaces. Yeah, I think we're probably, this community satisfies that requirement. Proximity to transit and services. All right, so Oak Street is an arterial corridor. We've talked about that. Cascade Avenue is a collector street. 7th and Wasco were 2 of the first roads that were improved, I believe, in the 80s under the urban renewal plan in order to create more connectivity between the downtown business district and the other commercial industrially zoned areas of town. It really doesn't get a whole lot better connected than this corner for those reasons. Again, our residents will have access through public transit, dedicated bike lanes, pedestrian infrastructure. And then just to give you a sense of, folks say, yeah, but can they really get everywhere they need to go, without getting in that car as often as you think? Here's some of the key distances we're talking about. Safeway, really kind of, that's the big one, right? It's less than a mile, 0.9 miles from this location. I think most people are going to be able to get on their e-bike and go get their groceries that way. Main Street Elementary, closer than that, 0.7 miles. Providence Hospital, a big employer. Again, one of those folks who has a hard time finding some of their employees because of lack of places to live. They are just a little bit over half a mile. And then downtown businesses, I said less than 0.3 miles. 0.3, I use that because that's City Hall. We're right in the thick of it. Oh, one of the things to mention that, well, that'll be later on, sorry. Where Sorry, I lost my my spot here. Where were we? Shared access and pedestrian landscape facilities in the right of way. So since the new development has only one shared access point, the frontages beyond that will be improved for pedestrian access. We're going to landscape them really nicely with very limited interruptions. There will be some short-term bike parking out front. 2 spots are slated to go there. And then again, those individual access points enable us to do that on both Oak and Cascade. We will be required to provide bicycle storage as a condition of approval. Again, that's something we do anyhow. All right, transportation. There's a number of items here to talk about, and we'll walk through them as quickly as possible. This is an important one, the traffic assessment letter. The takeaway here, I talked to you about total number of daily trips generated, 241, with peaks less than 25, not triggering the impact analysis. And then the engineer did comment here in the second paragraph about the distance of the driveway from other driveways. A little reclama on this one. As you probably are aware, this was received August 11th, so not very long ago, and I did share it immediately with the city. I understand that some folks may want to dig into this a little bit more, read it more closely. If folks feel strongly about that, I'm certainly open to a continuance for that purpose after we get to the end of this. And if you feel comfortable, then I'm also open to not doing that. So good either way. Landscaping. We already talked about this some, so we'll just keep moving forward. Performance bonds, we'll do them as needed. Burden of proof, we think we're being compliant in really giving very detailed responses to all the application requirements, and we will continue to do that. We'll work with the city closely and meet any conditions of approval that are deemed desirous by the city. Final plans, we know we're responsible for gaining review and approval from the city staff for final plans prior to actually building. All right. That moves us on to site plan review. Natural features. So currently, what do we have? A parking lot with shrubs. There's not a lot in the way of natural vegetation. There's no natural water, there's no unique terrain. The stormwater currently all goes into the stormwater system because of that impervious surface. We're proposing green roof. We're proposing water retention. Look, newer development has newer standards. They're better. And of course, we will work closely with Hood River Engineering to ensure that we're doing it right and that we're doing it to Hood River standards. If we encounter any mature or native species on site that can at all be retained, we will retain them. And as we encounter invasives, we will remove them. All right, grading. We did include a highly detailed plan. Again, Mark did a great job with these, dealing with grading. There's no adverse impact on neighbors, public right-of-ways, or public storm drainage system to the drainage plan, particularly as compared to the current plan. The grading and retaining system will be done in consultation with city engineers. We understand we will absolutely get prior approval of the plan before we build. And the same with erosion control. It's going to be in place prior to the site prep. We'll work closely with the city to make sure it's done right. Public facilities. All right, water, sanitary sewer, storm sewer, fire protection, streets and sidewalks. It's all accounted for in the plan to standard. Again, working closely with the city. It's all available right there. The adequacy of service is either already on site, will improve it, or will contribute towards the improvement as necessary. And of course, fire and police, we did confirm that is available, and they are involved in our planning process. We talked about traffic and circulation already. I think if there's more questions on this, we can deal with those towards the end. Storage. All right, so storage. Mostly this deals with waste. The standard is it has to be screened. It can be screened through vegetative materials or appropriate fencing. We are doing that in both the in both the south lot on the western side there and the north lot on this interior alcove in the driveway area. Equipment storage. This is a picture of the roof. Again, we talked about that green roof piece, but then we have some equipment on the top. There's some mechanical equipment. It's going to be screened in a manner coordinated with the architectural design, and the screens will be installed prior to occupancy, which I believe will also be a condition of getting a certificate of occupancy. Now we move on to design, which I'm going to pass the mic over to Mark. And let's just go over here. Mark, you want to talk about design a little bit? You're muted, Mark. Can't hear you.
We also have David Gabriel promoted so he can participate in this part. So thank you, Locke. I'm Mark Engberg. I'm one of the principals at CoLab Architecture and Urban Design. And we had a number of clear and objective criteria that the city put out for us to be able to actually meet. And those are, just to list them out, it's massing, which is basically how the building, the mass of the building relates to the site. Offsets, that's basically pushing and pulling forward and back the facades. Materials, pretty obvious. What sort of building materials are we using for the facade? Windows, larger windows are viewed more favorably. Canopies, how did we deal with canopies? We'll explain how we did that. Roof forms and the addition of primary roof terraces and different things happening at the roof. So, and then some other elements which we'll touch on, and along with orientation of the building to the street. So in terms of the massing, we've intentionally taken the massing of the upper levels and pushed them back, and then also on the west side of the building lowered it, intentionally relating more to the more urban space to the east and less urban space to the west. It's also, with the push and pull of the facade, we've done some work with being able to create a more light and airy facade in general, not just one big box. David, do you want to elaborate a little bit?
Justin, were you able to promote our other architecture person?
Yeah, we're working on promoting him.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'll just keep going. So as you can see with the roof deck in this view, which is actually, I'll draw it right in here, right along in here. So we've intentionally set the massing of the building back behind the core so that it brings, just at that point, it's 4 stories tall. And then we've done a lot of carving on the edges to also help with reduce the scale of the massing. David, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, when Mark left off with the massing, you can see that one thing, particularly after the last 2 years, we all appreciate, particularly people living in apartments, is the ability to get outside and have fresh air and have some relief there. So the idea of taking in the advantage of the site and the wonderful views to create these exterior balconies on the corners of the buildings and within the center of the building, you can see some balconies over the entry to the drive. That gives, it's a wonderful amenity, but it also breaks down the mass of the building significantly so that you're not met with continuous hard vertical edges. Part of this design and the use of the different materials, you can see, here we show a buff colored textured brick, which we intend to relate to the historic core Hood River. We also pair that with this sort of horizontal shiplap siding, which is a nod to the residential neighbors and some of the wonderful wood frame and wood clad structures surrounding the property. And really taking those two materials and almost a weft and a weave between those materials to provide some visual interest and some lightness and some relationship, as I said, to the surrounding fabric. But it's a building of its time. It's modern, it's light, and that's intentional. You can see that the balconies extend across with these horizontal lines across the facade, and on the rear, the units on the rear of the building also enjoy large balconies. You can see between the windows, for instance, we switched to a vertical siding with the intent that that would be essentially a screen that would continue the zone of the window, but allow us to locate all the things that we don't like to see on buildings, but are necessary, ventilation intakes and exhaust and the like, so we can really present a very clean and a beautiful exterior.
So if we go back to item number 2 with the offsets, what we're talking about is these areas in here have been pushed back. So all these areas. And then of course, there's the erosion of the corners.
And we're also taking advantage, there's a slight angle to the property line. And so the higher brick mass is set forward from the lower brick mass. So we essentially have two 45-foot wide elevations rather than a continuous 90+ foot elevation. And we think that helps to break down the scale and provide some visual interest to the building. And the other thing we do with the offsets is, since we are at the property line, we don't have the opportunity to do canopies, which is something we always like to do when we're able. So in response to that, you'll see that the entries to the commercial space and the entries to the lobby are all set back away from the building facade to provide a transition, a threshold between the sidewalk and a zone where doors open easily and you can move easily in and out of the building. If you get caught in some rain, you have shelter there. So many of the properties of a canopy, the visual interest transition and the softening of the way the building meets the sidewalk are accomplished through the erosion of the building and pushing back those entries to provide both depth and liveliness, but also an ease of flow along the sidewalk.
So going back to the criteria list, the massing, we've just described how we've reduced the massing offsets. We have push and pull in the facade. The materials, we have 3 different materials on this facade facing the street, 2 different materials on the rear facade. The windows are large windows, basically in all of the units on floors 2 through 5. The window starts at 3 feet above the floor and go basically to the ceiling. And at all of the balconies, it's floor to ceiling windows as much as we possibly can. So that meets that criteria. As David mentioned, the canopies, because we're at the property line, we're not allowed to project into the right of way, but the way we carved out space underneath the building, we basically have a condition where we don't have a canopy, but we have space that functions just like canopy that is being covered. And then criteria number 6, roof forms and other interesting things we've added to the design of the building: roof terraces and balconies. And then other architectural elements is we're adding, we plan to add vegetation to the balconies and also with the green roof to make the building as green as possible. And in terms of orientation, the building is completely oriented towards Cascade Avenue, but we did do setbacks on the on the east and the west that provide us with the opportunity to have setbacks far enough from the property lines, those east and west property lines, that we will actually have windows on both of those facades. There's a fire code requirement that you can't have windows if the openings are too close to the property line. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Locke.
Thank you, Mark. Just a real quick note on this, bringing us back to slide 54, that setback in the top there, that's a common area. So just in terms of amenities for folks and how much folks like to have access to outdoor spaces, we felt it was important that all the residents have access to outdoor spaces, able to see that really incredible, beautiful place that we live off to the north. All right, so parking. I think we've talked about parking. Again, this is part of the site plan review as well in that standard criteria stack. All right, let's talk about the C2 zone and how this is compliant with the requirements there. First of all, we'll look at conditional uses and site development requirements. Multifamily mixed use is consistent with the code. Again, minimum density is 6 units. We're proposing a total of 33 across lots with 800 square feet of commercial. There is no minimum lot area. And we have more than the required 50 feet of frontage on both Oak and Cascade. Setback requirements, there are at C2 no setback requirements. However, unless it's adjacent to a residential zone, we have no residential zones that are adjacent to this property. Nonetheless, we are voluntarily putting in a setback of 5 feet both to the east and to the west for this. Maximum building height. So the allowed height for mixed use buildings is 45 feet. Due to the slope, the height is being measured at 10 feet from the lowest point. Measured from that point, this building comes in at 44 feet for occupied space. This is an illustration of what that looks like. Hey, it's our old friend parking. So I did want to just highlight here the map of what parking is available. A lot of folks have expressed some concern about hey, what are you doing with a 0.7 something ratio? Well, you have the ability to get monthly parking passes from the city. These blue stripes, of course, are all those streets where you can obtain passes to park on the street. And then there are really just a lot of lots in the area. You've got the Columbia lot, Cascade, within blocks. The Elks rents monthly passes for their lot. You have the state and front lots here, and then you may or may not be aware, the railroad actually just opened their space for parking as well. And in talking with them, they do have an interest in talking about monthly. I don't think their program is up and running yet. They're just doing hourly at the moment, but they have expressed a willingness to, if folks are interested. And again, this comes back to the idea that, hey, some folks are going to want to have a car just for when they want to go on a road trip, but 80% of the month, they're going to be more than happy to walk 3 blocks to work downtown or ride their bike to the grocery store, because people who live in Hood River often enjoy doing those things and prefer that lifestyle. So we'll move on from here. Lighting, no pole lights. We did make sure that our wall sconces and fixtures are specified to avoid glare, light pollution. They're going to be shielded. We're going to specifically address these in the building permits process. I'm sure the city will hold us to that and make sure that we're doing that we are actually doing the right thing, whether or not we know what right looks like, which we do. Any signs we put on the building will comply with Hood River Municipal Code Title 18, and of course they'll be permitted prior to installation. And we have already talked about landscaping. All right, everybody's favorite slide. In conclusion, we talked about who we are. We talked about this project, why we do what we do, the fact that we are absolutely not interested in any short-term rental activities in this property. We went through sort of the 6 major buckets of criteria that needed to be discussed. it's like I said in the bottom here, this is difficult, right? Workforce housing is hard. That's why most people do luxury housing. That's why most people, get subsidies when they do affordable. As I've gone through this process with my team, I've heard concerns from folks in the community. There are people who live around there who talked about traffic, who've talked about parking, who think we have too many cafes, maybe have concern about the character of the neighborhood or the character of the developer, which that last one I'm not sure I would poke too hard at. But the bottom line is for most people, seeing their neighborhood change is hard, no matter what the change is. But we feel it's worth doing because not being able to have a stable home and being housing burdened is hard too. We think we've achieved a compassionate and compliant balance in this project. And again, I just want to bring it back to this is already commercial one. We think this is a much better use of this site than what another developer might do here. Again, looking to the south at those $1 million Airbnb townhomes or a 3-story office, that doesn't necessarily even have to have parking. So we take a great deal of satisfaction about creating residences that people call home and enjoy living in, and that's why we do what we do. So that's my formal presentation. If folks have questions, and my team and I are very happy to answer them.
All right, with that, from the commission, any questions that you have for the applicant?
Oh, I have a question.
Thanks, go ahead.
Yep, it was noted that there was not going to be really any redevelopment on the southerly tax lot. And I'm wondering, I guess, why we're rezoning that tax lot.
So there was a really good reason, and the city cued me into it. Let me see if I can recall what it was. I believe what it came down to was maximizing the number of residences on the entire space and allowing for common use of parking. So by having both lots involved here, I believe I believe that was the thing that, this was responsive to city input and not to, I like to do my own work and answer questions with my own answers.
Sure.
But that,
staff can get to that one, I guess, at the point.
It had to do with updating the southern lot up to code in terms of parking and garbage access. So
wanted to hold us, make sure we were doing that.
Correct.
We can let staff comment when they get to it. That's my only question. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Any other questions from the commissioners? I'll go. So, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering about the current parking on the north side. Is that a public parking section? Who parks there now?
No, that is not public parking, although we don't enforce particularly at all unless somebody complains. That is private parking for residents. I've definitely had to tow broken down cars that were there for a month or so, and had to survey all the residents and say, is this your car? Do you know whose car it is? And
okay, so that's private. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so this is Mark Frost. I guess my question is, you talk about workforce housing, you talked about the types of projects that you do. Is there something that you're going to build into the process of who rents here to make sure that they are working local?
That's a really good question. And this is something which we, that's not the right one. This is something which we definitely grapple with, is how do you really target the folks that you're trying to, to target? The short answer is we don't have the administrative, we don't have the ability, right? As landlords, it's really hard for us to say, to discriminate between renters based on where they're from, right? However, we try to engineer the majority of our units that are targeted for workforce housing, again, to be attractive to people at that price point and with the level of amenities that might not attract somebody who's looking for a second home. Somebody who's coming here to vacation a month or two a year, or whatever it is often going to be looking for those granite countertops or the kinds of things that we're just not going to spend money on because it's not key to people's quality of life in that bracket. So it's not a satisfying answer as I'd like to give you. It's just that our hands are somewhat tied in that process as landlords.
Okay, I have another question. This may be a little bit technical, but showing the massing, you talk about the balconies. I'm looking at the floor plans and it seems incongruous with the elevations. They seem to be very shallow. I don't know that you could even stand on there. My calculation is they're about 2 feet deep. So I'm not sure if you can stand on those balconies.
I'm going to let Mark speak to that, but let me, Mark, would it be helpful if I opened up the floor plans here and shared that?
Sure.
Okay.
I think that's the case in, oh,
hold on, let me get to there.
it's the case in the middle balcony. This is really functioning almost, middle balconies are functioning almost like Juliet balconies, but these are, the corner balconies are deeper.
It seems the scale is off from the floor plans to those elevations or the
Nope,
3D rendering. So
no, the model's based completely on the floor plans.
Yeah, there's, let me, there's, there's a, we do have 3 panels that opens that space. So the balconies are about 33 inches deep on those corner units. And we went back between 3 feet and 33 inches, and where they end up in the end, I'm not sure where we're going to go. The balconies on the back are 5 feet deep and quite wide. But the idea was that using a broad opening multi-panel door would provide an ability to move in and out of those spaces and provide an extension of the living space. So that's how we're sort of imagining those balconies existing. To that point, the idea of how these units are tailored towards the market, the designs are intentionally compact to take advantage of the wonderful resources that Hood River provides, and allowing the units to be more compact than a typical market rate unit. And so in some ways that also selects and creates a rental price based on a smaller unit, which makes it more affordable to a larger group of potential tenants.
And this is a model that we've had significant success with in our Newport developments, where you provide features that folks are normally not going to be able to access, but are not so grand that folks think, oh yes, this would be a great vacation home for me. And everybody, you get the people who are really going to look at that and say that Juliet balcony is the nicest thing I've ever had in one of my rentals, and to boot, we have that rooftop common space because we do believe that folks should have access to outdoor space that they can actually, use.
Okay.
I would say the balconies are really more like lanais, and then barbecuing or sitting around a table with friends, that activity takes place mostly on the roof deck. And we also don't want people storing bicycles on the balconies, hence we provided
22 spots are insufficient.
All right. Thanks, Mike, Mark and David. Any other questions for the commission? Okay, I appreciate that. Okay, so what we do now is, and I think it might be appropriate that we take a small intermission. Dustin, do we want to do that now before your staff report, or shall we take our break and come back?
You bet.
We're 2 hours into it.
Yeah, if you all need a break, it'd be just fine. We have,
okay.
I have no issue picking up where you left off.
Okay, sounds good. Let's make it a quick one. Let's take a break. We are into intermission. Let's come back at 7:30. Let's call it 7:40. So 13 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Frost.
Wow.
All right, Dustin, over to you. Can you hear me?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now that we're back, the applicant covered a vast majority of the materials regarding the conditions and regulations applicable to this request. Again, the request is a really two-part it is a request to rezone the property in question from C1 to C2. And then second associated request is a conditional use permit for a residential and commercial property to be built on the same parcel, which triggers the conditional use approval to be heard before Planning Commission. Again, as written into the documents, the existing 12 units are to be retained as a part of the request, and the balance of the property, the 21 dwellings, are new to be built on what is now an off-street parking facility on site. The site is located within the Central Business District, which is designated by your zoning code, the Hood River Municipal Code, Title 17, which is that location allows for the use of parking, a parking fee in lieu of off-street parking. That's a unique characteristic of the current location that's applicable to either any development, the C1 development or the C2. The zoning change does not authorize that. That is by virtue of its current location. As shown in the plans, the southern property does include additional site improvements, changing the access onto Oak Street, an arterial street, to a single point of access, and some additional landscaping work that's contemplated on the site and is depicted in the plan set. You have a number of people who have signed up to speak here. So unless you have some questions, you have my staff report that's been available. I do anticipate some changes to that report based on material that's come in from the applicant that we requested. They reviewed that material, specifically the transportation analysis letter, which went into some greater detail and was updated by DKS and Associates, and is now in your packet. And yeah, I'm here for questions. I know we have a lot of people that want deliberation. We will request some continuation so that we can analyze that letter. It'll also provide the applicant an opportunity to hear some comments and some questions and come back to address some issues. But I want to make sure that we get through the hearing tonight and get people to have the opportunity to participate.
All right, I appreciate that. Thanks, Dustin. Okay, in that case, what we'll do, does anybody from the commission have a quick question for Dustin before we go to public testimony? Okay, I see 2 hands raised. Let's go with Commissioner Irving.
Yeah, I sent an email to Dustin and I wanted some clarification, I guess, from Dan. The staff report refers to this in some places as a multifamily project and in other places as a mixed-use project. And in the staff report, we apply the standard 1716-050 for a multifamily project, yet we have some commercial component to this. So I'd like to get a comment on that. And then my second question relates to the needed housing statute and the ability for the requirement for clear and objective standards. And my question is, how do we apply those, the clear and objective requirement in a building that is not exclusively needed housing? i.e., can I have a commercial office building and stick one unit in the top floor and then be exempt from those standards? Yes or no? Or how do we apply that in this case? Those are my 2 questions.
Thanks, Commissioner Irving. Dan?
Hi, good evening. This is kind of a tricky deal because of the way the Hood River Code is written, not entirely congruent with current state law. State law now considers, it used to be hinged on needed housing for the clear and objective standards requirement. Now it's all housing. So in this case, some of the criteria before you, as Bill mentioned, are not clear and objective. They're decidedly subjective, particularly the compatibility components to it. In this case, the needle that you're going to have to thread is to apply those subjective criteria to perhaps the CUP for the commercial component, or evaluate those criteria only relative to the impacts of the commercial development, and also the rezone, because the rezone is not needed for the housing. Housing is allowed under either zone. So I don't take the position, I don't view the rezone as being an application for needed housing. That's my assessment of it. So the rezone criteria can be evaluated under the subjective criteria that apply, and there are some of those. And the CUP can be evaluated under the subjective criteria, but only with regard to the commercial component. The housing component cannot be subjected to discretionary criteria. And the question about imposing a condition prohibiting STRs, there isn't any case law on whether approving a residential development like this that ostensibly provides a huge amount of housing and goes a long way toward meeting your need for housing. If it can be converted to STRs, that is potentially a Goal 10 violation in my view. There's no case law on that, but I worry as these things evolve over the state of Oregon that our needed housing, our housing available lands and housing inventory is premised on all lands zoned for housing being for long-term housing, and short-term housing, of course, eliminates that. So I question whether the possibility of STRs might undermine the approvability of this. I don't see a problem with imposing a condition prohibiting STRs, since that ensures the assumptions are valid about needed housing and housing inventory. And the applicant has already said, we don't want to allow these to be used for short-term rental. And also it's a clear and objective standard, clear objective condition. So I don't really have any heartburn with that condition, but the subjective standards, if they are used to evaluate the housing component, that's a problem. Does that get at it, Bill?
That answers, I guess, one of my questions. The other one, well, you answered one that I didn't ask regarding the STR, but the other one I did specifically ask was the application of 1716-040, or whether this would be a multifamily project, and then we would move into 1716-050, which actually has different decision criteria. So it seems like this is a mixed use project. There's a commercial element to it. I'm trying to figure out, are we applying the right criteria, the right standards?
That's kind of a planner question. It's a mixed use project. It's also a multifamily project. So I would defer to Dustin on that. In terms of whether the city also gets a great deal of deference in deciding between two competing sets of criteria, which set is applicable. Let me go and take a look while Dustin is addressing that and see how consistent these two sets are. So, Dustin.
Thank you.
So for those watching at home and are following the code decision or the code request, the difference between the site plan approval criteria 1716-040 and 1716-050 when going between general applicability and multifamily really comes down to that compatibility standard, which in 040 comes under standard sub H. The height, bulk, scale of building shall be compatible with the site and the building. The use of material shall promote harmony, which has been specifically omitted from the multifamily standard. So this is where the idea, and I think Dan had spoke to this regarding that standard is not clear nor objective. It is a listed standard. So the idea of compatibility is by its nature not clear or objective. We believe it's certainly something that could be evaluated against the commercial component of this. It's really kind of unprotected. I don't believe compatibility is necessarily a feature that could be spread across to the needed housing portion of it, or as the state mentions, all housing being needed housing. I think there's a disconnect there between state law and our code, which is not necessarily surprising news if you use this document a lot. But clearly compatibility also shows up in the discussion of conditional use criteria. 1706 specifically impacts, which is a criteria. This is a conditional use request. That feature and the idea of compatibility is also listed in that section, which is outlined in the staff report as well. So that's really the big difference between the two sets of standards, is the idea of introducing compatibility or having it withdrawn.
Okay, I have a follow on. So that compatibility section asks about height, bulk, scale to be compatible. Height seems like a pretty objective standard. It's either 43 feet tall or 44 feet tall, and the adjacent buildings are X, Y, or Z. Do you think that that is an objective standard or not?
The height is height compliant or not compliant. I think that is an objective standard.
Well, is it similar or equal or greater than all of the adjacent buildings? Seems like a pretty objective standard.
If true, but I guess the question would be, does a building that's taller from another building or shorter become not compliant? Is it, and this is why we have this discretionary discussion, because it's taller, does it make it incompatible? Because it's not built to its complete zoning size, does that make it incompatible? That's really kind of a discretionary feature.
Okay.
So I think that's for you all to.
Any compatibility is discretionary, but is it the zone change that triggers that? Is that the only application that triggers it?
The use triggers it.
The use. It is subjective, so that can't be applied to the housing component. In the site plan criteria, in both 1716-040 and 050, the subsection dealing with design, variety of detail forms, citing should be used to provide visual interest. Very subjective, can't be used for the residential component of this. I would suggest that, given that the building itself houses, housing units, that can't be used as a standard for this project at all. So whether it's a 10 feet shorter or the proposed height, is still going to be subject to these design variety of detail criteria. Can't be used.
I'm looking at H, 1716-040H, height.
Let's see, 040H. Compatibility is decidedly subjective. And so as I understand it, the zone change is what gets at the additional 10 feet. I would think that, denying the zone change based on the height and bulk doesn't really affect the housing, because housing is still allowed. However, this is a site plan criterion, 1716. So I would say site plan is not one of the zone change criteria. And so it cannot, 1716-040 sub H can't be. It's not tied to the zone change aspect of it. It's a site plan thing. So I would say, no, it can't be applied.
Okay. It would be, I think, helpful for us as the commission to have staff and legal tell us specifically which criteria we should be evaluating or not. So thanks. That's my question.
Thanks, Commissioner Irving. All right, so Commissioner Stepina.
Oddly enough, the question that Dan answered earlier was one of the questions I was going to ask, which was about imposing any conditions about short-term rentals. So thank you for that. The second part of that is, I guess, a question for staff regarding, the current Title V. It seems clear that, if something could not be imposed in terms of a condition on short-term rentals, that the existing code would allow for all of those theoretically to be short-term rentals. So I wanted to know from Dustin, as staff's been asked by the city council to be working on amendments to specifically C2 and C1 zones and short-term rentals. Is there anything that's upcoming that would be addressing that? Would it disallow? I understand there's parking here in lieu, that would probably reduce the amount that could be there. But is there anything else that council will be considering that will impact this should they decide to have short-term rentals, even though they've indicated otherwise?
There is an amendment to the short-term rental regulations in the works.
And in terms of the impact of that, can we understand what that would be?
That would, upon adoption, would be applicable to anyone who comes in and applies for a license for short-term rentals.
So if as the property owners, if they were to apply for a short-term rental under the new under the proposed changes that are being worked on, how many would be allowed? Is it one per owner?
I think one license per owner is what the proposal is, but it hasn't been marked up or subject to a hearing yet.
Okay, thank you.
Currently, the driver in the commercial 1, commercial 2, or C1, C2 zoning, the limiting factor on this building is the availability of parking. The code in Title V specifically discusses the number of parking spaces that are required to meet a certain number of bedrooms. So in the code specifically says the fee in lieu will not be used to buy your way into short-term licensing. So by virtue of number of spaces on site, that is a limiting factor to the number of short-term rentals that could occur at that location. The one workaround to that would be is if they were to purchase or obtain off-street parking within 250 feet, that could obviously increase the number of short-term rental opportunities. But unlike long-term residents, which has the opportunity to be bought or satisfied by a fee in lieu of parking, that is not a remedy for a short-term rental license.
Understood. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for staff? I have one. I'm a bit confused, Dustin, about the difference in how many units could be built on a C1 versus a C2. I just heard from the applicant that only 3 additional units could be built if it stayed as C1. Is that the number you're thinking?
Yeah, in the analysis, we looked at it as the property in its entirety, 0.8 acres of C1 real estate. That essentially would allow in the entire site 22 total dwelling units. The change to C2 would enable across the entire site apples to apples 33. The change is also really applicable to not so much the parking aspect, but the height. So the allowing the mixed use building within C2 enables the additional 10 feet. So really the delta between its current status and proposed requested status would be 10 feet difference and approximately 10 or 11, depends on how you round, dwelling units. So that's really the difference. As of today, commercial use or office use could be put in place. 3 stories of office building with no parking is an entitled right under the current facility. So just in terms of magnitude of current use and allowance as compared to what has been proposed.
Appreciate that. All right. Commissioner Powers.
I just want to clarify if I heard this correctly, but did you also say that we could add a condition that would deny the ability to turn these into short-term rentals? Could we do that in this process?
I believe so. And kind of a follow-up to Bill's question about wanting clarity on these criteria. As I see it, the height and massing of the building, it can only be addressed in the context of the zone change criteria. And those get added. They don't use compatibility, but it's the criteria. The hearing body shall consider factors pertinent to the preservation and promotion of the public health, safety, and welfare, including but not limited to the character of the area involved, its peculiar suitability for particular uses, conservation of property values, and the direction of building development. That, as I read the criteria, is where perhaps building height and massing can come into play. But I hesitate to suggest that site plan criteria is a place where what the building looks like can come into play, because this is an application for a site plan for housing.
Okay. All right, if there's no further questions, we'd like to get to our public testimony. Now it's 8 p.m. I would appreciate if we could wrap this up by 9 p.m. So we can stay with it. That means if you're going to speak, I'd like to limit time to 3 minutes. We have 20 people who are in the attendee box. We also got ahead of time a list of some folks who are wanting to speak. So let me actually just go through that list first, and then we can get to those who have raised their hands. So the order that I have is Jen Spolhog and Justin Spolhog, Shayla Fleischer, and Scott Simmons. So if we could go through those first, and then we'll get to those that have raised their hand. Appreciate that. And
Also,
and again, we've read the staff report. You can assume that we've also read your emails or written letters. So any other illustration beyond what you've written would be appreciated.
Also, if we run out of time this evening, the record will be left open for some period of time following tonight's hearing, and that the city would accept any manner of written comments if people get cut off.
All right.
Jen, if you could raise your hand, I don't see you within the attendees.
Jen or Justin Spolhog?
Doesn't seem like they're here.
Yeah, does it? All right. Do you see Shayla Fleischer? I see her name. Shayla, we are promoting you. You are live. You can come off mute.
Hello there. My name
Hello.
is. Hi there.
If you can start with your name and mailing address, that would be appreciated.
Yep, Shayla Fleischer. I currently live at 2560 Riverview in Hood River, and I own the property adjacent. I'm number 6 Legacy House, 721 Cascade Avenue, adjacent to proposed property. First off, thank you guys. Sorry, we have to cut this so short tonight because I definitely have quite a bit to say and quite a bit of work put into this. But I'd like to start with number 1, a concern about the letter that was submitted by the city planning department to residents and people within this neighborhood. My first concern is that, and I did try to go down to the city planning building on a Friday around 3 p.m., but apparently the doors are locked now on Fridays. And so I couldn't get in there. I did call. I made a complaint directly about the letter that I received on July 15th. And that was that not only was there a large, social anxiety. There was a yellow outline of the lots to be rezoned, but there was also a very large and misleading arrow placed directly on Oak Street. And after being after meeting with some of my neighbors and having them reach out to me, they also were very confused by this. And I'm kind of wondering why, if there are 3 lots to be rezoned here, and there was a, I'm sorry, what I'm trying to say is, not only was it misleading, but why would there be an arrow on just one of the lots that was trying to get rezoned, which is the larger of the one on Oak Street? Why wouldn't there be an arrow placed on each individual lot that would make 3 arrows, or none at all? But people were complaining that they misunderstood that it was on Cascade and not on Oak because of that arrow placed there. And I've never seen this on any other letter or anything that I've gotten for a rezone in my history of living in Hood River. The other is that there was a description next to the rendering on the left-hand side. It was completely, in the letter, it was completely ineligible. In fact, you couldn't even read it after it was magnified. No matter how many times how large I tried to magnify it, it was ineligible. It's really difficult to read even when you have it on screen in front of you. So anyways, that's a big concern because this letter went out to people and it was misleading and it was difficult to understand. Sorry, going to the next. It's a non-compliant building. It's very obvious. In fact, I'm very surprised to see that this was submitted at all. Thank you, Mark, for taking your time to walk around the neighborhood. And you guys good?
If you could just finish up.
Yep.
Give you another minute.
Thank you very much for taking the time to walk around the neighborhood. Anybody and everybody would see that this does not fit in at all with the surrounding buildings, regardless of what it's zoned for. It's what's placed there now, which is the lodge building, its size and scale. I believe that all of everything that was submitted to you is optical illusions. My house is set back 30 feet right now in some of the renderings. It's a 3-story house when in fact it's 1 1/4. It's a single level family home. I am zoned C1, which means I could someday do my ADU, have a single family home, have townhomes if I'd like, and there is no way zoned as a C1, even a C2, that I could ever compete pound for pound with a building like this. And why would I ever? I have lived in this neighborhood above on 801 Oak Street in this neighborhood, and at this home raised my children. I have pictures of them mowing the lawn where a 54-foot building is going to stand above them. Even if I build something myself as a C2, C1 owner, I will have a building 54 feet tall, towering above us while we enjoy what we're allowed to enjoy, and sunlight and sky and some privacy, even in a C1 zone. And I have a picture of myself this spring with my children planting, doing gardening, and my daughter for the first time ever mowing the lawn. And I will always have a lawn in front of me, even if I'm zoned C1, but this building will sit 0 setbacks to the east of me. I will never, even as a C1 owner, be able to enjoy the things that they have in their renderings, which are people on balconies on the edges, east and west, pointing to the east and west of their beautiful views in their beautiful new condo. And if you pull any of the comps across the street at the lodge, you will not find a single one of them recently in the last few months to even a year that has sold for less than $400,000 for a 1-bedroom. There was this year and last year, there was a building there is a lot with a home on it that sits on Cascade. It is 607 Cascade Street. It is oversized. It is zone C2, and it was for sale at the exact same time duration while this development group was trying to purchase and build this ginormous oversized building to maximize for profit only. They spent $2.4 million on a building that I purchased for $800,000 18 years ago from Don Enemaker.
Make it clear you own that apartment.
I did own that apartment. I still have people living in that apartment that come to me and say they can't afford to live in it anymore because these new landlords keep raising their rents. I still have their leases in my files in my garage. This is a cute neighborhood, families who barbecue. We all know each other. I remember when the Fitzsimons lived down the street from me, Karen Ostry, the Honorable Judge Karen Ostry was my neighbor in the blue house, the beautiful little blue house that sits on the corner. I have put love in my home, money into that home. And even if someday I cannot keep it standing, I will build something that it stays in the character of that neighborhood. Those aren't VRBO homes. My home is zoned VRBO. I don't do that. I decorate it for Christmas if I can't be there for Christmas. I hand out candy for Halloween and make sure that my neighbors don't have a dark home in their neighborhood. I care about this neighborhood, and so does everyone else. And that's why I care about that letter, to make sure it was done properly and went out to the people to make sure that they had the opportunity, like I do, to stand up to this kind of development. I look at that building and it's beautiful, but I want to go into the retail of that store in the Pearl District in downtown Portland, not in the neighborhood of Cascade Avenue and Hood River.
Thank you,
That's all.
Shayla. Thanks for your testimony. I appreciate that very much. Appreciate the effort you put
I'd
into
like
your
to add
letter.
one thing.
This, my husband, Robert.
My name is Robert Henshaw, Shayla's husband, and I've been taking very detailed notes on this matter. I'll be extremely brief. But I'd like to make note that Locke has made it really clear that he's aiming to build more housing. But he also makes it very clear that he wants the rezone to increase density, to decrease costs, to essentially increase his profitability. He also made it very clear that he has investors or shareholders, and that it's essential that this project is profitable. So in summary, I would say this zone change from C1 to C2 is really about profitability. And I'd just like the members to make note of that.
All right, I appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to go to the list. I guess we're a little bit out of order. I should have started with proponents, neutral, and opposed. There was an opposed. If I go back to that order of the folks that had got into us ahead of time, I'm going to go to the next on the list, and that is Scott Simmons. So could we promote Scott? Have we found him? Amy?
I have not. Could you raise your hand, Scott, if you are in the attendees?
It's going to be a bit tricky if they're called.
I see Public Power Council has
Yep.
raised
Is
their
that
hand.
okay? Thank you.
Yes, and if I could just change it, that's my work. My work. hand.
Absolutely. Thanks,
Yeah,
Scott.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Scott Sims. So let me just kick off here, and I'll try to stick within the time zone, and also make sure to file the or do the compliance here part of address, et cetera. So my name is Scott Sims, not Simmons, S-I-M-M-S.
Yep.
Hood River resident, and my mailing address is 711 Oak Street here in Hood River, and I'm a lifelong Northwest citizen, fourth generation going on fifth. And I do really appreciate all of you having this opportunity for community input tonight, and for your service to the community in your planning commission roles. I know this is not easy, especially as we start to see growth in the community. So I have specific code and community livability concerns about this proposed 21 unit development at the corner of 7th Street and Cascade Avenues. And the height exceedance issue is confusing from a code definition standpoint. Certainly we could see that with some deliberation and discussion here tonight amongst all of you as the experts. So let me just say, from a layman citizen standpoint, the zoning change for a height exceedance for this project should not be approved. There are reasons that the city has zoning requirements in the first place, and I hope my reasoning for my objection carries merit in your deliberations, whether it be here tonight or later on. First, the proposed building is extremely out of mass, scale, and compatibility with the surrounding buildings, and as rendered, there do appear to be opportunities to meet the city's zoning standard for such developments. Most notably, this building could be reduced by at least one or more stories in vertical height. Specifically, just referencing the citizen before me, it would certainly take the height and the mass down by quite a bit. Second, even though ancillary non-occupied structures can be allowed in a zoning exceedance, I'm concerned at the skyline impacts of future solar panel installations or other unoccupied structures that could further reach into the space beyond the 45-foot vertical cap of the existing zoning rules. Third, I understand that the city has an approved in lieu of approach for parking, but I'm concerned that a building of this size would have far more of a real world impact on parking and street flows compared to other established single family and multifamily residences in the area. The current in lieu of standard is not adequate with the congestion and parking impacts our streets are experiencing right now. Sure, you can find street parking in the middle of winter, but even those days are shrinking. And as well, the planning department is likely aware of the actual real world number of cars that multifamily units in the gorge are needing. The reality of parking by the train station and walking up to this project is pretty slim. And while our town is for sure a place full of fit and active people, the reality of relying on your bike for all things is pretty much reserved for those young, hardy souls and the gorge athletes, not the common person. An application with so many in lieu of spots is frankly way more than our streets can support, and the fee in lieu of system doesn't really produce much revenue. Fourth, while I'm certain the developer will object to the removal of the top story or two of this proposed structure for the sake of cost per unit efficiencies, there would be cost savings for materials and structural reinforcements. I believe the planning department and the city council should closely scrutinize the intent of the citizen and community input when it codified its affordable housing strategy resolution 2022-06 on May 9th, 2022. That resolution placed an emphasis on preservation of our community spirit and livability for everyone, while also adding affordable housing, whether termed as workforce housing or some other creative combination of adjectives. Please do not overlook community livability with respect to this proposal. And last, with all due respect, I'm completely supportive of economic development and support of commerce. That said, this property just sold for $2.55 million in December of 2020. It is currently generating $165,000 to $202,000 per year in rental income off of the existing building. Mr. Letwer also said his business model is to sell off an asset in 10 years or so. The question the planning department and the city council should decide, and this is probably the most crucial part of this, the question the planning department and the city council should decide is, what price does our community ultimately pay for a zoning variance so Columbia Gorge Capital can build this massive project, realize its profits, and then move on to its next conquest? The fact of the matter is we will all have to live with whatever gets built. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Appreciate your testimony. Thanks, Scott Sims. All right, last call for Spellhog, either Jen or Justin. Scott, if I could get you to lower your hand, that'd be appreciated. Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll go to the list. Folks with their hands up. Peter Cornelissen, I've seen your name up the entire meeting, so let's have you testify.
All right, thank you. My name is Peter Cornelissen. I live at 1003 Fifth Street, Hood River in the Heights, and I'm speaking tonight as an individual and also as a former city council member. I'm in support of this project because it's going to bring much needed rental units and housing units to the downtown core. I wrote a letter to that extent. But I wanted to relate an experience I had while I was a council member. I talked to Mr. Shepard, who owned the elder Mr. Shepard, who owned the implement business downtown. And you remember they built across the freeway down by the waterfront. And I said, how was the development process for you? And he said, it was really tough. I would never do it again. And it brought to mind the fact that Hood River is not an easy place to develop in. And here we have a developer who's going to bring needed housing, who's willing to undergo the rigors of going through this planning process. And it's not every day that we have developers like this knocking at our door. So I understand the neighbors' concerns, and if I lived down in that neighborhood, I would be concerned as well. But I think they've addressed as many of the issues as they can. So that's my comment. Thank you.
All right, thanks for your letter, Peter, and thanks for your testimony. Although next on the list, you could lower your hand, Peter. Rico Prenato. Prenato, if you could help me understand how you pronounce your name, that'd be helpful too.
Yeah,
Start with your name and mailing address.
Yeah, Rico Prianto. I own one of the Ethan Beck townhomes at 705 Oak Street, across the street from the development. I'm calling in because I am a little bit concerned about the proposal that is being presented tonight. I have serious concerns about the parking in lieu fee and the extensive parking that they're not going to put into the development. As we all know, parking is a major problem in Hood River, especially in the summer months. And this is going to push 20 to 30 more cars into the neighborhood surrounding Cascade between 7th and 9th. I'm sure that all the residents who do currently live in that neighborhood are going to see that they're not allowed to park in front of their house anymore, because there's now going to be an influx of new people parking in their spots, which is not desirable, nor is it acceptable. I'm very concerned about the desire to rezone the south lot, but yet has no development plans for that lot. That seems a little odd to me. And I've heard, I think during tonight, that this is phase 1 of the development, which means phase 2 is coming. And once he has the rezoning approved, phase 2 is allowed by right. And I can guarantee that there's going to be a denser development put on the south lot once that zoning is in place. You're effectively helping this developer eliminate the buffer between C2 and residential in Hood River. I consider these blocks to always have been, that buffer that was used to help alleviate the downtown from the residential spaces to the west. Putting this into C2, if I own one of the properties that was able to be rezoned in this buffer, I would absolutely be gearing up to also apply for a zoning change. Denser housing means more profit, and that's a valuable thing. He talks about workforce housing extensively, but that is a non-defined thing. There's no guarantees or exceptions he's taking to the rents he's going to charge associated with workforce housing. He's just saying that the rents could be in this range. It's a keystone of his presentation, yet there's no real definition or expectation of what that means when he's done building his development. I live in one of the Ethan Beck homes, and I was, loosely involved in the development of them as they were being designed and constructed. And, that developer was able to build those and sell those successfully without asking for rezoning or exceptions to the city zoning code. So it is possible without changing the character of the zoning of the city as it exists. And I have concerns about the fact that there is a token commercial space in the bottom of this unit and of this development. And I feel that was included just so they could get the exception to go higher with the height restrictions. And, that seems like it doesn't mix well with the rest of the neighborhood as it is. Obviously, this is a massive building. It's going to be the tallest building in all of Hood River. And should that really be on the buffer between residential and C2 zoning? It just doesn't seem like it's appropriate. And, this all comes from me as a professional civil engineer. And my entire job is about development and affordable housing and trying to help developers find ways to build housing for people who don't have it. But this just doesn't seem like it's the right fit to me. And that's all I have.
All right, I appreciate that, Rico. Thanks for your testimony. All right, next up we have Julie Shayer Weiner. Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Start with your name and mailing address. That would be great.
Did that work? Can you hear me?
You're live now. Yes, we hear you.
Oh, okay. Yes. My name is Julie Shire Winner, not Weiner. My address is 709 Cascade Avenue. I own the building next door. I can appreciate the difficulty he's facing with what he's trying to do in a C1 zone. I've faced that too. I have considered going to long-term rentals and improving my parking. But as like a single female business owner, it is a very onerous process. I mean, I need $10,000 just in permits without even getting like and like the architect I talked to, he wanted $10,000 to help me get this approved. So it was like $20,000 to try to rezone in order to get more parking. I think what some people don't realize is that if you look at the zoning ordinance, the C1 is actually uses the R3 zoning setbacks. So it's kind of antiquated that it's using like the R3 like houses up the street zoning when, you know, behind me is like a wine bar and across from me is like a three-story or two-story building and everything like that. So I think that's really what the problem right now is. The C1 is pretty antiquated and it's not even the height, it's just the density. Like for instance, if you want to do, so no structure shall be placed closer than 10 feet from the public right-of-way. So 10 feet, I mean, that's like 10% of his property. I mean, almost, well, maybe not, but something like that. And garages that face the, let's see. So garages have to be 10 feet from the nearest right-of-way. Side yards, no structure shall be close to 5 yards. Okay, and actually he is doing the 5 feet thing. So it is really hard to, you know, manage density and like the process here. And one of the problems I have is, so I'm going to be an island surrounded by C2 and also my other neighbor, Kevin Crown. So we both talked about wanting to get rezoned to C2 also, not because we want to build some massive thing. We just want to improve like our parking. And for me to go through this project, you know, I need $20,000 just for this. And, you know, then I'm having to pay, you know, quite a bit of money to improve my parking. But right now, it doesn't make any sense to do any improvements on my property when I'm C1 and it's so limited to the space I can work with. So I can appreciate what he's doing here, because changing to C1 to C2 is you're going from R3 to C2. So that's the problem, is it's really you're utilizing R3 zoning in C1 for residential. So I guess I would say I'm in support of making a change here. And I'm like, you know, I'm the other side exactly. I mean, it's been, you know, a parking lot for 20 years. I've owned my property for 22 years. And, you know, I think it's time to start seeing some nice improvements in downtown. And I mean, I'm very sympathetic that it seems like there really wasn't a good comprehensive plan where you put, you know, Shayla's house next to a multifamily house and then, you know, a house next to my apartment building also. You know, it is really messy there, I have to say. And so I don't know, it's probably difficult to figure out. But right now with the zoning, we're all C1, and so we all can utilize that. But yeah, I mean, I think there has to be a decision where does the growth stop, or where can it continue to go? So, you know, I think we need more housing. You know, if he was coming in and wanting to put, you know, a McDonald's or something like that, you know, or a bar or a coffee shop that stays open till 11 o'clock at night, I'd have more concerns than workforce housing. So I guess I'd say I'm in support of this, and I can appreciate the other people's concerns who live like next door to them, but I don't really think it will impact like many other people. And I was looking on Sherman Road, and there's like 5-story condos being built on Sherman Road. So it seems like, you know, builders are utilizing height to maximize their density all over town. I've never seen so many townhomes in a little town. So anyways, I guess I support it, but I do think that this R3 is really limited, and going to C2 can, you know, be a lot more effective for all of the property owners there to, you know, mitigate parking and driveways and stuff like that. So okay, thank you for your time.
Appreciate that. Thanks very much, Julie. I see an EDEL answer. Don't know what that is, but if you could come off mute, introduce yourself, give us your name and mailing address, that'd be great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
I am Ed L. Sasser. I own the property at 708 Oak Street, which would be the Evoke Winery. and I also have a house here in town at 1816 Lincoln Street. I'm opposed to the project because we will, well, for a bunch of reasons, but basically it will affect our view. When he mentioned earlier, Lack did, that that the view to the north would be preserved, he's ignoring the other views, which is to the northwest and to the east for the other residents. And I would also take some exception to the notion that this building can be built at a price that will make affordable housing. To me, when I look at it, it doesn't pass the site test. And when I talk to a friend of mine who does this kind of work for a living, his cost estimates were pretty high on what that building might cost. And I also don't believe that they meet the criteria for variances in, geez, a bunch of ways. And I know we're short on time, so I'm not going to get into all that. But it's a big building. You build it, and it's a gateway drug for all the other C1 properties in the neighborhood to file, like Julie just said, who's my neighbor also, to file for C2. And then that whole buffer zone is going to disappear. And once that disappears, I'll tell you what, it'll be just like Northwest Portland, where you've got, it used to be nice neighborhoods. You could park a car, and now you can't park, and neighbors fight over parking spots, and you've got homeless people camped in there, and it's just a mess. So anyway, I really like Hood River's small town aesthetic, and I would encourage the Planning Commission to, if at all possible, preserve that. That's why people want to be here. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Ed. Thanks for writing in and testifying tonight. All right, we have one more hand up. If you want to join us in the testimony portion, please come on and raise your hand. Ed, if you could drop your hand, and we'll go into Carol. Sorry, Carolyn.
All right, am I on?
You are on, thanks.
I don't get video? I'm just audio, I can't get video somehow?
It's just audio, Carolyn.
Okay, so I actually want to object that this meeting is being held by Zoom and that I am not permitted to be on video like the applicant was allowed to be on video and his one architect still is. I don't think that that is fair. This decision is a very, very, very big decision for Hood River. It's a game changer. And if you don't recognize that and don't recognize how big that is, I feel sorry for you. I want to thank you for the time that you put into this. I want to thank Commissioner Mark Frost for actually coming down and looking at the site. Hopefully he walked down the neighborhood. No one has addressed that I live at 808 Cascade Avenue in Hood River. My mailing address is P.O. Box 620 in Hood River. No one has addressed that from 8th Street to the west is an R2 neighborhood with single-story, two-story homes is mostly what's in there. There's one bigger home that was converted to an apartment complex. A lot of these residents are long-term residents. I am a moderate income person that is getting to be a low-income person. And I was lucky enough to be able to have a house in a small town. I like my small town. I'm off track. So I'm going to say that I was a little bit confused when Dustin said that the property was 0.8 of an acre, whereas the notice letter that got sent out says it's 0.46 acres. So if there's an issue with that, I'm going to bring that up and object to it on the record. Is it 0.8 acres or is it 0.46 acres, so that we can preserve that for when this gets to the city council. I'm also do not think that we should be talking about the zoning change and the site plan review. They are two different things, and as Bill Irving pointed out, they have two different review characteristics. Once you approve the zoning change, yeah, that's their site plan review, but if they want to change it, they can change it. And as long as it fits into C2, it's good to go. They said, oh, well, we're not going to have a coffee shop or a bar. I was the only one that went to the Zoom meeting, and they want a restaurant. They don't want office, they want a restaurant, which is then a different traffic impact. So this change, if you make this change, it changes so much The block that it's on is supposed to be a transition block from the C2 zoning of downtown Hood River that translates then into that block as C1 general commercial, which is then next to an R2 development, not R3, R2. They bought this knowing it was C1 and what they could do with it. I hope you read my objection, and that my understanding is that that is part of the record, and that you go back and read that. None of the buildings in the entire downtown are 54 feet from the street and 5 stories tall. Putting something that size on the subject property is incompatible. The current C1 zoning also provides for parking in lieu and allows for multifamily residential development limited to 35 feet, which would be 44 feet due to the slope. Everyone's talking about 44 feet. It's 54. The C1 is sufficient. The applicant fails to mention that the property borders an R2 residential neighborhood that is mostly single-family homes, but rather implies that the subject property is not near any residentially zoned property. There is currently an adequate supply of suitable land in the downtown core and the Heights Business District, so that changing the zoning on the edge of a residential neighborhood is not permitted. The applicant has not demonstrated a lack of suitable land, so the commission must deny the request. From memory, I came out with 25 sites that are suitable and ask that you refer to my written testimony. There are probably more. What the commission should note is that none of the parcels in our written testimony border a large R2 residential neighborhood consisting of older, small, single-family homes. The development at 1306 Taylor was zoned C2 when it started and borders 1 block of residential homes that when you get to the end of that block, what are you at? You are at the City Public Works Department. And across the street is, it's on busy 12th or 13th. There's a firehouse down below. This is not that. In addition to 1306 Taylor, there are 2 other large apartment complexes in the works, Rand Road and 230 Clearwater. Rand Road is mandated to be low rents per HUD. The developers of 1306 Taylor also state it will be workforce housing, but there is no mandate, just like there's no mandate here. However, Ben and Maui are long-term residents that need housing for their businesses, so I have more confidence in them than in this capital group that the rents will be affordable. That also brings me to this capital group. 2-member LLC, the owner of the land is a different LLC, which is owned by the LLC. So I think we need to know who the investors are the investors who they bought it from. My understanding is these plans might be from the person they bought it from, who tried to get this development through the city for 10 years and never could, but all of a sudden, poof, now here we are. I think the city needs to really exercise some caution and restraint right now to see the effects of the other developments before approving a zoning change that would allow for mixed use that is so far out of line with the surrounding neighborhood and properties. Further, we just heard from the property owners of 705 and 709 that they want to rezone to C2 too. And if you guys were all here back 20 years ago, when we said we shouldn't even rezone the Naked Winery from C1 to C2, but that got done. So the applicant does mention the lack of R3 land, but since C1 allows for more development than R3, this does nothing to support its application. They can build multifamily housing. They just can't build as much as they want. They don't have any parking requirements. The parking issue is a red herring. You make everybody focus on that, and then they lose an actual argument that could win to fight this down. So to me, the applicant is trying to pull one over on all of us to get a rezone by arguing that rezoning from C1 to C2 helps with the lack of R3 land to develop multifamily housing on. It's ridiculous. Make more R3 land. The city's just revamping zoning the city just revamped its zoning to increase density. So it could have changed C1 requirements for residential development. If this was a 3-story apartment complex, I wouldn't be here. If it was a 3-story office complex, I wouldn't be here. I'd rather have a 3-story office complex because it's only 3 stories. That to me fits in better with the neighborhood. Parking, that horse has left the barn. You can't park on my street. I use my scooter. Get out of my car, put my scooter in, leave, come back, put my hazards on, take my scooter out, park my car. Double parked the other day to unload my groceries. So the parking, well, it's gonna make it worse. You can't fix it. So I just, like, if they wanted C2 property, they should have just purchased C2 property. And I really don't, yeah, I object, like Shayla did, to the yellow arrow pointing to Oak Street and not Cascade. I too have spoke to different people that were confused by that. I think it's deceptive because those people thought the 50-foot wall would face Oak Street. So the notice letter is defective and we must start over. So I'm gonna go until I cry. This building hurts my heart and it's already impacted my emotional well-being. I don't understand how someone that objects to development in the valley because it is incompatible with the agricultural way of life has no comprehension of how this large building with general commercial is incompatible with the small town neighborhood it borders to the west. This attitude of let's just fill up town like New York City is not the solution to our housing issues. You all make me feel like a second-class citizen whose voice and observations are ignored and useless. I live in Hood River because I want to live in a small town, not a big city. The current C1 zoning protects that way of life, while C2 zoning will destroy it. We do not want or need you to bring your big city ideas to us. We want reasonable development, 3 stories, that is compatible with our small town way of life. We worked hard to purchase their house and are still working hard to maintain it. Unlike the applicants and some of you on the commission, it is our only house. We love our home, we love our neighbors, we love our neighborhoods, and we will fight to protect it. Unlike this Westland applicant, we have been in the neighborhood for 25 years. I still consider myself a newcomer. I have walked at least 4 times a week from our house on Ace and Cascade to my office downtown for those 25 years. I do not need a study or some Johnny-come-lately developer telling me what is compatible with our neighborhood. I and my other neighbors know what it is, that this is incompatible and harmful, and this rezone is incompatible and harmful and must be denied. This request to change the zoning to increase density and commercial use by outsiders that have no idea about our neighborhood is so incompatible that it would make me sad every day as I walk by it. A small piece of my soul and the soul of the river will be taken if this complex is allowed to be developed on C2 zoning. Please make the responsible and neighborly decision and deny the applicant's zoning change request. Thank you very much.
Caroline, I want to thank you for your testimony tonight. Thank you for your detailed letter as well. All right, next up, Robert and Theresa Beard. And we have your letter too in the record.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, good. We're the owners of 703 Oak Street, Ethan Beck townhomes and Cascadia townhomes. And we purchased that home with the impression of the neighborhood as the way it is. We couldn't even fathom having some kind of a massive building built down just below us. It's a Trojan horse that once they get that put in there, they're gonna tear down that small 2-story apartment building and put something massive directly on Oak Street. It's just incompatible with the area. And I'm a mechanical engineer, registered, and I would do a lot of, I have a commercial building license, contractor's license in Oregon, and we would never propose such an ominous project in the middle of a residential area. So I certainly wish that you will not approve this applicant's proposal and scale. It has to be scaled down. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Appreciate that very much, Robert. Okay, that's it for folks who have raised their hand. If you want to add anything, now would be the time. Again, there's no limit to providing written testimony if you want to send that in. Shayla, you've raised your hand again. You are
Yeah,
available.
oh,
Yep, we hear
sorry,
you.
yes, I'm sorry. There's an unmute button I didn't see there. Yeah, thanks. There, it was just interesting to hear Caroline there towards the beginning. She did mention more like curiosity, but with this group, were these plans part of the purchase of the sale of this property?
We don't know the answer to that, but that could be something that the applicant can cover in their rebuttal.
Yeah, all right. That'd be good to know. Thanks.
Okay, we are just wrapping it up. Julie, I see you're back on. Talking permitted, if you can unmute.
Yes. I'm sorry. I'm sure I'm making a lot of enemies here, and it's not like I totally support whatever, but I do think, you know, we got to support some development in the area. But I think we should point out that the lodge is C2. It's not C1, and Edel Sasser's property is C2. Right behind my building is C2, and right across the street is C2. And next door is, you know, C1, and then it's all C2. So it's, you know, we are surrounded by C2. At least Kevin and I are. And then it stops at C1 next door. But the lodge, they did that on purpose. They changed it to C2 so they could build, you know, with more density, because the C1 density zone just really doesn't give you any opportunity to build anything that makes it affordable to build. That's why I haven't done anything either. So, okay, I'm done. Thanks.
Appreciate that, Julie. Okay, I don't think we're going to do a back and forth tit for tat for every comment that comes on. Let me, I'll give Robert another voice, but we're going to close this down here.
Hey, just quickly, I forgot to mention that it was very erroneous when they said that the Cascadia development, the 6 homes there are all vacation rentals. Less than half are vacation rentals. So it's not what he presented. That's all I have to say. Thank
I
you.
appreciate that. Mike Kitts, I saw your name was up earlier. If we could promote you, appreciate your ideas here. You are now live. If you could unmute yourself. We don't hear you now. Yeah, we hear you. We got
Okay,
you.
Mike. Yes, okay, thanks. Mike Kitts, 3880 May Street. Been a Hood River resident since 1984. I spent from 1995 to 2000 developing over 400 units of workforce housing in this town. It was a challenge, but satisfying to handle the keys to nurses, teachers, public employees. So I know a little bit about affordable housing. First of all, anyone attempting to provide affordable rentals or housing of any type in Hood River should be encouraged, not discouraged. I've worked with Locke for about 5 years in an advisory capacity. I built houses with him. I watched him do a project on the coast in Nye Beach. I don't know if you know about that, or if he told you about that, but the Nye Beach Planning Commission forgave him any off-street parking at all to do affordable housing there. He did exactly what he said he was going to do. He produced them, and he's got them all rented out affordably, just like he said he would. He's an honorable man. His partners are honorable people. Their hearts are in the right place. They're not trying to ruin this town. They've got a vested interest here. They've got a couple of kids here. His wife's a mover and shaker, does the right thing. These people are good people. They're not trying to mess up Hood River. Anything that provides affordable rents in this town, obviously, if you ask any employer, the biggest problem they have is retaining employees or getting anyone here to be able to afford to live in this town. We have our corner on 5th and Oak Street, this Mike's Ice Cream, the Ruddy Duck, and the Hood River Common House. Between those 3 businesses, we employ about 50 people. Luckily, about half of them are high school kids that already live at home, or Mike's Ice Cream wouldn't exist. My daughter is desperate to find workers in the Ruddy Duck. She can't pay enough, or she can't find anyone to come here for any price, actually. She's faced with having to cut back 2 days a week to be closed, just like Betty's is now, or to have to open at noon. And Betty's has been a thriving business since 1976. They're closed 2 days a week because they can't find employees. My daughter's faced with the same thing, and the Common House is in the same boat. So anyone that thinks we don't need affordable housing or affordable rentals in this town has got, I don't know. Personally, I think multifamily units should be allowed in most neighborhoods, scale wise, depending on the neighborhood. I don't think this project is too out of scale for the neighborhood. I could understand people's emotions about it. And it's a transition point. It's a big, ugly parking lot. I think the renditions look great. I understand people's emotions. Infill lots like this lot have existing infrastructure close by. So instead of going further out of town and having to bring infrastructure in and deal with all the things that a development has to deal with, storm and sewer, water, everything, that is very expensive. Everything's on site here. So I think he can bring this project in and the price he's and bring the rents in and the price he's estimating. And also, lastly, I think survey after survey have shown that people are against sprawl and they're also against density. So that doesn't leave very much wiggle room for anything. So that's the end of my comments. Thank you.
I can appreciate you sticking around and come back on. Okay, I'm going to call that for this evening. I appreciate the testimony here very much. If there's some additional testimony that you would like to submit electronically, that would be appreciated. We're going to ask for a continuance so that we can, close out with the staff, get the applicant's rebuttal, close out with the staff, and then have the commission go through their deliberation. So, Dustin, quick check-in with you before we move to request the continuance.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, for typical timing, to keep the record open post this hearing is typically the 777 number, 7 days for anyone to submit new evidence related to the hearing. That's applicant, public members of the public. There could also be staff. We'll probably have some addition. Then typical time frame would be 7 days to create arguments over that new evidence, allowing everyone to do not submitting new evidence, but to argue their points of the information that's been submitted. And then finally, 7 days allowing the applicant final rebuttal. That would be, if we set a time frame, the 22nd, 7 days from today would be the submission of new material. 29th, 7 days from that for arguments from all parties. And then we do fall on a holiday. The 5th is a holiday, so that would be the 6th, allowing final rebuttal from the applicant. That really kind of leads to that day. Planning Commission, given the materials, I would request that we open back up, reconvene on September 19th. That's your regularly scheduled meeting in September, but that would provide time for 21 days material packages, and then actually having the material 7 days advance for all parties involved to review the record as it's been completed, both applicant, Planning Commission, and general public.
Okay, I appreciate that. Any other procedural things we'll need to do? I'm asking for a motion for continuance. Correct. Okay. Am I correct, Dustin? Just want to check in on procedure here.
I think
we're not closing the public testimony portion. We're keeping that open.
Well, you would keep it open for 7 days.
Yep.
And then on the 19th, there would be no new oral testimony. That would just be deliberation, if that's what you choose to do. So 7 days for the additional materials to be submitted, 7 days for arguments, 7 days for the applicant to make its final rebuttal. And then on the 19th, when you reconvene with all packet, it would just be for deliberation of the Planning Commission. No new oral testimony.
Okay.
Or any testimony at that point.
Right. Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone sticking with us this evening. Thanks for the information from the applicant. Thanks for the public input. This is very important to this project. And with that, I would Yep, go ahead, Dustin.
I'm going to need a motion if that's what you
Yep,
all want to do.
I'm gonna,
Okay.
I'm asking for a motion for continuance for the dates just as outlined. So somebody could recount that, that would be appreciated. Somebody on the commission want to put in the motion? Go
Yeah,
ahead, Sue.
I move that we continue file 20022-31 and move it out to the next hearing, which will be for just deliberations of the planning commission and no new testimony on September 19th. And that allows for the 777 process that Dustin already reviewed.
All right, Sue has put a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, thank you, Sabina. So we are going to ask for a continuance of this meeting, keep the file open for 7 days. Public, you are welcome to input your comments to the city planning department, and we will review that for 7 days and likely be back here on September 19th, no earlier than 5:30 p.m. Any further deliberation? All right, let's have a vote. So I could just run through the names again. So Commissioner Vice Chair Sue Powers. Commissioner Mitchell.
Aye.
Commissioner Stepina.
Aye.
Commissioner Petzing.
Aye.
Commissioner Hoffman.
Aye.
Commissioner Irving.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, motion passes. Thanks everyone for your time. If it's okay, Dustin, let's cover the meeting minutes next time.
That sounds great. That's
Yeah,
your provision.
and next time is September 6th, right? We have a meeting that day?
If we have any items on there, we may not have an item ready for you at that point. So
Okay.
it was an option, something we were looking for just to make sure in case something came in, but we are getting pretty close to the 20-day notice period. So if we haven't noticed anything in the next 3 or 4 days, we're going to be over that time frame and be automatically to the 19th.
Okay. All right, folks, we will see you likely on September 19th. Thank you all for your time this evening.